Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Sharingan Naruto has arranged marriage with Hana. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by the Pyroman and link in the description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. The Rescue. Oh, so this is what you do when the poor Gaki's not looking. The young woman spoke up from the roof of a nearby roof, looking down at the group of people with weapons of all sorts. She didn't know at first why they were grouped up when that had chased a boy that had passed her not 5 minutes ago. When she had caught up to the group in question, she only had to look at the boy for a split second before figuring out why they were after him. His body now was covered in his own blood and various bruises were scattered all over his body as he lay down half-conscious in the center of a group of men and women, all angry at him for the beast inside of him. The group had taken a small step away from the boy as they had heard an unmistakable voice, one that filled with determination to protect the boy, as well as venom for the villagers who were attacking them this night. It wasn't an uncommon thing for the blonde-haired boy to be chased and beaten, but today was by far the worst of them. It wasn't just clenched fists and kicks, but weapons as well, mainly kunai and shuriken. Many people's grips on their weapons had tightened with fear as they looked up, seeing a large trench coat flapping in the wind gently. Her purple, spiky pineapple-like hair was sitting atop her head as it usually did. The group's eyes widened in fear as they fully recognized who was calling them out, and although they were afraid, some of them weren't going to show it. "We don't have business with you, snake whore." He spat out, rewarded with a piercing glare from the woman on the roof. "We just want the demon brat." She knew what it felt like to have the whole village against you, to have them hate you and treat you lower than dirt just because of association. It wasn't exactly the same case with the boy who had just been beaten senseless, but there were enough similarities between the two to make her go out of her way and stand up for him for the day. "The name," she said fiercely, unleashing all of her killing intent towards the group that had attacked the boy, "is Anko. Midorishi. You forget it and I'll have my snakes come after you." Her usual cockiness wasn't there and was replaced by sheer determination to make sure that the boy's life would get better in some way after this. She knew his burden, his tenant, and she knew that his life was pretty bad for being known solely as the demon brat. She didn't want for him to go insane like the others, and since he held the most powerful of all 9, the damage from such a rampage would be pretty devastating. The stupidity of the villagers had made them believe that the Bey was simply the demon inside of him and not his jailer. They all wanted revenge on him for one reason or another, but they failed to see that killing him will do absolutely nothing. The demon will regenerate in time and come back, punishing the village known as Konohagakure or simply Konoha for causing him so much trouble. As the silence had slowly passed, the villagers were becoming more and more scared of her. It was her specialty after all, and was one of the best in the torture and interrogation department, surpassed only by Ibiki Marino, who almost treated Anko like a daughter when nobody is around. "We're not afraid of you," Snack. The man's words were interrupted by a kunai lodging itself inside of his throat, his body flying to the side and laying dead as he came in contact with ground. Anko smirked and jumped up into the air, landing just in front of the boy who she had been protecting. He was barely hanging on to life, but he was able to see everything going on around him. He couldn't move, much less speak, and simply lay there as the woman practically landed on top of him. The sudden landing had scared the villagers back a few more steps and her smirk had turned crazed. "What did I just tell you all? I may not have used my snakes that time, but it doesn't mean I won't kill you," she said in her usual cocky attitude, walking slowly over to the man who she had just killed and ripped her kunai from his throat, turning to the villagers and licking the blood from it so that the throwing dagger was clean. She had certain methods to scare the villagers and by far that was one of her favorites just by how badly it scared everyone. "Now you better get going before Anbu shows up and you all end up like that guy," she said, pointing to the dead man that she had killed only seconds before. It didn't take long for the villagers to scatter from the alleyway, leaving just Anko, the boy, and the dead body. Her head snapped up to one of the darker shadows and she narrowed her eyes, inspecting it closely. "Alright dog face, Nico, why don't you tell me why you didn't swoop in and save the Gaki? Hell, I bet he'd like to know just as much as me." The Anbu with the dog mask Sweatropped as his nickname was mentioned. It wasn't only Anko who used it but also the boy when he would occasionally see him. The one in the cat mask was forced to hold back a giggle as they both appeared from the shadows in front of the woman and the now unconscious boy. Inu had taken note of his current state and the pool of blood around him as well, his mask tilting downward to look at the boy, then back up to meet Anko's eyes. "I'll tell you later, but you should get Naruto to the hospital. The fox doesn't seem to be cooperating this time." Inu spoke up, glancing at the boy once more to bring Anko's attention to him. Anko turned around and looked down at the boy, seeing the pool of blood surrounding him and going right through his clothes. "Damn it, I don't think he'll be happy about hearing his clothes are covered in his own blood." She thought to herself in a light tone, trying to lighten up the mood just a bit. Her head turned back to the two Anbu and nodded to them, silently telling them to meet at the hospital. In the case that they weren't looking or just didn't understand, she said it aloud. "I'll meet you at the hospital with the gaki, just get him a room and get the doctors ready." The two nodded and shoo-shined away, leaving a small trail of leaves where they once stood. Anko had a matter to take care of first before the hospital and slowly picked up the unconscious boy in her arms. He couldn't be more than 6 at the time, since she had just quick thoughts in her head about when the Kibuai attacked. She was right, almost 6 years ago the demon fox had attacked and was eventually sealed inside the boy in her arms. She didn't really care if her trench coat got messy or not, since she had a complete closet filled with many more just like it. She jumped up into the air and landed on the roof once more, running at full speed to the Hokage tower. The Hokage sat quietly at his desk as he dealt with his lifelong adversary, eternal rival, and opponent, paperwork. Even when he was younger and during his initial run as the Hokage, he hated having to do all of the paperwork that was required for the position. More than once he had asked how his processor, the Yondaime, had been able to do all of this work and still manage to have the time to live happily with his wife. The question baffled him, but all thoughts were halted as the doors were blown open with Anko holding the young, bleeding, and unconscious boy in her arms. His eyebrows narrowed as he took in the sight. It had been one of the very few times that Anko had actually looked concerned about someone that wasn't herself, and he only had to guess about what had happened. The villagers have attacked Naruto-kun once more, it seems. It surely won't be the last, but it does seem different. Sarutobi, the Sandom Hokage spoke up, pausing from his late-night work and looking at the two of them. Anko nodded and glanced down at Naruto, who was in a state of deep sleep from the looks of it. "The fox isn't healing his wounds like usual, so I had Nico and Dogface go and get a room for him so the doctors could patch him up." Sarutobi sat there quietly for a moment and looked at Naruto, his surrogate grandson, and the spitting image of the old Hokage's predecessor. He looked up at Anko, who had still seemed to be worried about him. "Well, why are you here then?" "Having him here will do no good, Anko. We will speak once the hospital starts taking care of him." She knew that she couldn't say anything to make him talk to her now, so she simply complied with a nod and left the room, heading back outside in the dead of the night to the hospital, which was only a short distance away. Anko dashed out of the Hokage's tower and stayed on the ground this time, rather than jumping onto the rooftops, weaving through the streets while keeping Naruto in her arms. She could feel his blood seeping through her jacket, but she didn't have any time to worry about it. She ran into the doors of the hospital where Inu and Nico were standing with a few doctors, some of them having a slight discomfort with having to patch up the demon child. One of the doctors simply motioned for them to follow him and the other doctors into the room. As reluctant as they were about treating Naruto, the Anbu made sure that they would give their full attention to the boy and care for him until he returns to his usual state. They had simply told the doctors that Anko would be happy to help them with getting more jobs for the hospital, silently telling them that she'd kill them all off if they didn't comply. Reaching the operation room, one of the doctors took Naruto out of Anko's hand, much to her disliking. One of them even pushed her out of the room as soon as Naruto was in the other doctor's arms. The door to the room was shut in her face as all of the doctors scrambled into the room. She was mad that they weren't going to let her see the operation, but inside she knew that it was for the best. Sigh, a small sigh, the snake mistress turned to the two Anbu and looked at them with as calm of a face as he could have at the moment. "Alright, now tell me why you didn't go in and save the gaki as soon as he was stabbed. I think that something like that should tell you that they mean to harm him." Her voice rose as she continued, inwardly unsure why she was stressing so much over the 6-year-old child. With a demon inside of him, he could probably protect himself by using its power, but he wasn't. And said demon wasn't even bothering with keeping its container alive. She paused with a curious look and spoke up once more before either of the Anbu could. "He doesn't know. Does he?" she asked them, causing both masked ninja to shake their heads at the soon-to-be Jonin. She sighed once more and thought more on the subject. Of course he didn't know. He was only 6, he didn't go to school, and he didn't have anyone tell him about the Kikbi, as were the Hokage's orders. He didn't know why he was being attacked constantly and only knew that just about everyone in the village, save for a few people, hated him and his very existence. "I'm going home," she told the two, sighing deeply and walking away. "Go and get me when the gaki wakes up." She knew that she could simply shush him away, but she just wanted to walk right now and she was perfectly fine with that. Walking back to her home on the edge of the village, she tried her hardest but couldn't stop thinking about one person. Naruto. She hadn't even truly spoken to him and yet she was all he could think about. He had endured a similar pain to her, but she knew that his pain would be much worse than hers. When she was younger, she actually had people that she cared about, but now she didn't, as most people hated her for being associated with that snake bastard. He, however, never really knew people that loved him for him. Sure, the Ichirokas loved Naruto and they did care about him, but they probably wouldn't be like that if he wasn't there almost every day eating ramen by the bucket. Other than the Hokage, those were the only two people that she knew of who actually treated Naruto like a human being. She could count herself onto the list, but this was the first time that she had actually interacted with him. He was probably the only person that she ever felt bad for, and it was driving her crazy. She just wanted to think about something else, but she just couldn't. While she hadn't ever directly interacted with him, she had seen the boy around the village a few times with that impossibly bright smile on his face. His emotions seemed to be infectious, as when he smiled, a few others smiled around him without knowing it, and when he was in pain, others suddenly felt the same. Anko groaned heavily as she stopped and turned around. The hospital, along with the academy, were connected to the Hokage's tower, and that was where she was going. While she couldn't just make the village stop beating him up, she could at least do her damn best to make sure that he could protect himself when the villagers formed a mob, and that would take some time. Reaching the office to the Hokage, Anko opened up the door to find that the god of shinobi was still at his desk, signing papers. What she didn't know was that he was watching her on her way back to her home with the use of his crystal ball. "Anko. Is there something else that we need to talk about tonight?" he asked her, already having a good idea of what she was here for. Anko nodded at the Hokage and looked at him calmly. His light smile and calm demeanor told her everything that she wanted to know at the moment. She knew that Hiruzen was extremely pissed off on the inside, but wouldn't show it. He was angered at the village for treating Naruto the way that they have been, and right now it only took one small step in the wrong direction to bring on his wrath. "Yes, Hokage-sama," she said back to him, thinking her thoughts over again to make sure that she would be making the right decision. "I want to become Naruto's guardian." Chapter 2. The Conversation. "I want to become Naruto's guardian." Sarutobi looked at Anko with a curious look, knowing that he had heard right, but wanting for her to say it again, just so that they were both sure of what she said. He wanted to know why she suddenly wanted to watch over Naruto, as he knew that they never really talked to each other much. When the little blonde would report to the Hokage at least a few times a week, he would probably say something if a suggestively dressed woman were to talk to him, if the case were to ever arise. You wish to become the guardian of Naruto. Tell me why." He didn't bother beating around the bush when it came to his surrogate grandson. Now usually, he would have instantly said no to anyone who would try to adopt or take in Naruto, but that was only because he feared that people would only do that in order to get closer to him to kill him. Anko was different though. She obviously held no hate for the little boy and had no reason to. She was an orphan before the Kikbi attack and in truth had no friends at the time, so nobody that she knew was hurt by the nine-tailed fox. Because he needs someone to look after him," she said hesitantly, still unsure about why she wanted to become the boy's guardian. She just knew that she had to do it, but she didn't at all know why. "Yes, he does, but how does that reason make you any more qualified to look after him than the others who have asked the same things of me?" he asked her, getting a look of surprise from the pineapple-haired Chunin. "Others? What others and how many were there?" she asked a bit frantically, questioning why the Hokage wouldn't let Naruto have a parent figure in his life. "If I remember correctly, the Naras have asked me to give them custody of him, as well as Yamanaka and Oichi, and I believe even Shimza has done the same as well. Hiashi has asked to allow the Haika clan to watch over him, and surprisingly enough, and Inuzuka has asked the same. Tsume, I believe." Anko couldn't believe what she was hearing. Those were all great clans, but why hadn't Sarutobi allowed them access to look after the boy as, if the Hokage were reading her mind, he spoke up once more, just as she opened up her mouth and raised a hand to tell her to keep quiet until he was done. "Before you ask any questions, I know that I should have let them take care of him, but I have no way of knowing if their intentions are true or not. I understand that I could have Inoichi come here and use his clan techniques, but what if they are conspiring against Naruto-kun? I cannot take risks like that, not with him. I've failed them far too much to let anything else come to him." Somewhat, Anko was able to understand what he was getting at. In a world where your killer could be your best friend, a little paranoia was always good for you. It wasn't all too surprising to hear that all that the Ino-Shikacho trio all decided to house the boy, since when one made a decision, the other two usually agreed with it, especially when it was Shikaku who was making the decisions. However, she was more surprised to hear that the Stoic Haika clan was also wishing to take in the boy. As far as she knew, no big numbers were taken off that clan during the attack 6 years ago, so maybe they weren't doing it out of revenge for their fallen clansmen. She could see the Inuzukas trying to get a hold of Naruto, since they had been known to pick up strays everyone once in a while. However, she didn't know what his last statements meant. She assumed that it had something to do with the Kyuubi, but his reasoning was much more than that. He had promised the boy's parents to look after Naruto, and he wasn't going to let them down any more than he already had. Anko stood there and thought heavily about why she wanted to watch over Naruto. It was true that she felt bad for him and she could obviously relate to him, but she knew that there was more than just being able to relate to him. She started once more, but held back since she simply couldn't piece together the right combination of words that would explain why she wanted to watch over the little Uzumaki. Pictures of him flashed through her mind of the few times that she had seen him, smiling as brightly as the sun and not caring what others said or did to him. Surprisingly, she saw herself in him, always doing what she wanted without caring what the villagers did, always having a reason to eat their food of the gods, and hiding their pain under a mask of fake emotions. She wasn't sure how long she was standing there lost in thought, and the fact that it was the dead of the night didn't help at all either. Sarutobi sat there patiently and also had little of an idea of how much time had passed. It hadn't been more than several minutes, but the silence made it seem much more than that. Breaking the silence, the Hokage and a good idea that he would share with Anko, and maybe that would give her some more time to think about her answer. He had already deemed her worthy of looking after his surrogate grandson, but he wanted for her to know why she wanted to take care of him, as he already had a pretty good idea of why she opted to do so. He wasn't the Hokage for nothing and had good reasoning for holding such a title. He was just as smart as he was powerful, making him a dangerous foe in multiple instances. Anko. He said, bringing her attention back to the real word. Since it seems that the Kyuubi will not be helping Naruto this time, he will most likely be unconscious for a few days. Take this time to think about why you want to watch over him. When he wakes up, I will send one of my Anbu to get you and you can give me your reasoning then, okay? Nodding slowly, Anko said nothing to her Hokage as she stood there, still trying to think over why she wanted to watch over him. She knew that she was far from being the best person to look after a kid and really, she wasn't even sure that she could do it. Sure, he had some spare money after missions, but she had heard that the Jinchuriki would put a restaurant out of business if he wanted to. She didn't have the money to pay for that kind of food, and although dango was her go-to food, she still had to eat healthily. She was a ninja after all, and she needed to be healthy at all times. If that is all, Anko. It is getting late and I believe that you have some thinking to do. Take care. Sarutobi said to her, getting another nod from her before she walked out the door. From the calm and focused look she had on her face, it was easy to see that she was already thinking about this and taking it seriously as well. That was odd for Anko, especially considering that this was more about Naruto than it was about her. The Hokage knew, though, as the two of them were both equally important in this matter. He decided not to elaborate on it further and instead rose from his seat, planning on retiring to his quarters for the night. Naruto groaned lowly as he opened his eyes. He had no idea where he was, but it obvious wasn't Konoha. He had been all over the village and he had not once seen a sewer design like the one that he was currently in. Although the sewer appeared dirty and filthy, there was no scent whatsoever. The young blonde slowly picked himself up off of the ground and looked around some more. He had realized that there was no pain when he stood up and upon inspecting his body, he was bruise-free, something that was usually common for him, but still off. Usually there would be very light and small markings from the previous cuts, but his body was perfectly fine. Suddenly, a threatening aura of power made itself known to Naruto, causing him to flinch and take a step back. After a moment of silence, there was a low and deep laugh coming from afar. Naruto wanted to know where he was and how he was perfectly healed, so he followed the sound of the voice, where a large gate with a piece of paper on it stood in his way from continuing further. Naruto was small enough to pass through the gates, but he didn't as of yet. He didn't know what was on the other side, and he was being unusually cautious about the ordeal. Suddenly, a deep voice spoke to him. My jailer decides to visit me at last, to what do I owe the honor? The voice was obvious sarcastic, and although nothing could be seen from the other side of the gates, Naruto knew that whoever was speaking to him was on the other side. The young blonde took a small step over to the gate, now examining the piece of paper with the kanji of seal on it. Naruto didn't know what to say to the voice, as he wasn't sure what it was talking about in the slightest. He had just been called a jailer, but it made no sense to him. He didn't own a prison and had no relations to one. Deciding to ask the obvious question, Naruto took another small step towards the gate. Who are you? A deep and low laugh could be heard from the other side of the gates, and as time passed, it slowly got louder and louder. Who am I? Who am I? I am the great Kyuubi no Yoko. Its thunderous laugh could be heard all throughout the sewers, causing Naruto to take a small step back. Suddenly, its laughing ceased and there was nothing but silence for a moment. Slowly, the demon fox walked up to the bars and looked down at its container, an evil smirk on its face. In reality, the Kyuubi had actually called Naruto into the seal and only asked the first question to humor itself. Naruto didn't say anything to the demon fox, his eyes wide and his jaw just slightly down. He had heard about the demon fox attack before when he was sneaking around, but he had no idea that he was connected to it. It all made sense now that he came to the realization of what was going on. Suddenly, his jaw clenched and his eyebrows narrowed. The tailed beast. So you're the reason I always get beat up. Because I have you locked up in me. Baka fox. Why don't you just leave? He was clearly mad at the fox, but the beast didn't seem offended. The Kikbi understood the hate that came from the village as it did attack it 6 years ago and did a fair amount of damage. To be fair though, it wasn't really it that was attacking. The Kikbi knew that someone was controlling him to attack Konoha. If it was that easy, Kit, I would have already left your body by now. We are bound until your natural death. The Kikbi was getting off track and shook its head slightly at the boy who was looking at him questioningly, wondering what it was talking about. That is not why I called you here, though. I want to make two things perfectly clear. It spoke seriously as it practically glared down at the boy, but not sending any killing intent his way. Naruto remained quiet, wanting to know what it was going to say. At first I did not attack Konoha out of my free will. I was controlled into doing so and had no choice of my actions. The Kikbi wanted to make it perfectly clear that it did not intentionally attack Konoha, and by the nod that Naruto gave it, he seemed to have understood that only someone with an impossible amount of power would be able to do such a thing. The second thing is that I do not plan on having a weak container. As a Jinchuriki, you are expected to use my power, but I am expecting you to be able to fight your own battles without even thinking about calling on my power. There isn't going to be someone to jump in like what happened just moments ago. It smirked evilly at Naruto as it remembered the provocatively dressed purple-haired woman who swooped in and saved Naruto and it. Naruto wasn't unconscious when Anko had dropped in and saved him, but he wasn't able to look up at her, and her voice was dulled to the point where he could hardly hear anything. He knew that he was lucky for her to come along and wanted to find a way to thank her if he ever saw her again. So where are we? The Kikbi should have expected this question as it had seen Naruto's memories and he hadn't leaned a whole lot in the 6 years that he had been alive, so the great beast decided to explain it to him. This is your subconscious. The mindscape. With enough training, you can reshape this world with a simple thought and maybe then I can finally get a nice place to live for once. It muttered the last part as it looked down at Naruto, slowly laying down to attempt to become level with the boy. But enough of that. The Kikbi spoke, making Naruto look up at it wondering what it was about to say next. You need your rest and let this be a reminder that you cannot rely on me to keep you alive. I expect you to become strong and when I find you worthy, I will allow you to use my powers. Naruto nodded at the demon fox and it nodded back to him. The young boy watched as the world around him became black and smiled to himself knowing that he had possibly just made two friends. The first one was the Kikbi itself, who didn't seem as bad as he thought it was going to be, and the second one was the person who had saved him. He knew that he would have to ask the Hokage who had saved him, but that could wait until he woke up. Back out in the real world, two Anbu watched over the boy, making sure that nobody would come in and attack him while in this state. It was so odd seeing him there, not being healed and not smiling in the least. As if Naruto were reading their minds, his face cracked a slight smile that could be seen by the two Anbu. Without knowing it themselves, the two of them smiled as well. The one with the cat mask dropped down from her position on the ceiling, slowly walking over to Naruto. Inu simply watched as Nico stood at the side of his bed, examining his face, seeing if the smile that they had detected was actually there or not. It had only been a few hours since Anko had dropped him off, but it seemed like an eternity since she had last talked. I guess we should take better care of him now that Anko seems a little protective over him, huh Inu? She was only given a nod in response, but it was all that was needed. They both knew that Anko would chop their heads off for not protecting him right, and she would make sure that it was as slow and painful as possible for the both of them. Both of them shuddered at the thought of Anko torturing them and silently decided to be more protective of the boy. Chapter 3. The Dream. Lying down on his bed, the aged Hokage sighed lightly as he looked up at the ceiling, thinking over the recent events involving his surrogate grandson. After 6 years of violence and torture, Sarutobi was finally starting to see that the village wasn't going to even begin accepting Naruto unless he proved it to them all, and they weren't going to make it easy. Well, he did outlaw people speaking openly about the Kikbi, as well as doing what he could to watch over Naruto, but it would not be nearly enough. He knew all too well that Naruto was attacked almost constantly, and even with Anbu watching over him, they did not do their job completely. They did come in and save him, but only when he had an inch of his life left. They never stepped in when the attack started, and he knew that he was going to have to start changing a lot of things. His relaxed gaze turned into a cold stare as he looked up at the ceiling and thought about Naruto's current condition. If he wasn't as lenient as he was, maybe it would have never come to this. Maybe he would have been respected like the Jinchuriki he had heard about, who also had close relations to the Kage of his village. If only Sarutobi had been a better Kage, then it was possible that Naruto wouldn't have had to face all of the hatred that he currently did. He could have just taken him into the Sarutobi clan, as nobody would have messed with him then. For the sake of Naruto, he was going to be a better Hokage. Sarutobi wasn't the only person who was thinking about Naruto, as Anko was doing the same on her walk back home, as well as the half hour that she spent while laying in bed. She didn't know why she wanted to look after Naruto, but something inside of her told her that it had to be done. When she looked around her house, she knew well that it wasn't the best place for a child to grow up in, and decided to start cleaning up, at least a little bit. On the outside, she wasn't the best choice for being a mother. Even she knew that she wasn't parent material, but something inside of her was telling her that it would be best for the both of them if she were to take him in, and it wasn't the dark whisperings of the curse mark this time. It sounded like her own voice and didn't remind her at all about the man who had put the seal on her. He had placed the curse seal on her and later told her that she didn't have the drive to use it and abandoned her and left her for dead. She idolized the man because he was all that she had, but in the end she threw her away like a piece of trash. By this time, she was unsure of if she was dreaming or not, but watched as the events unfolded in front of her. She didn't know where she was, but it appeared to be just a plain forest in the land of fire. Naruto was next to her with a smiling face, and in front of the two of them was another person. It was currently dark out, and she wasn't able to see the face of the third person, but she knew that it was Naruto next to her because of the kind warmth that he constantly gave off. Naruto took a small step towards the person in front of him and smiled at them. Anko had assumed that the person smiled back from the slight tilt of the head, but was overall unsure of who it was or who it could have been. Breaking the silence, Naruto took another step forward and kept his eyes on her person in front of him. "Thank you, sensei. You're the coolest," he said brightly, getting a nod from the person. Anko looked at them curiously and replayed the sentence in her mind, completely unable to hear the name of the person. It was as if Naruto's voice was completely muted when he had spoke the name of his apparent sensei. The person nodded and replied back, but to Anko, it wasn't any recognizable voice that she had ever heard. In fact, it was the voices of many people what she had heard before, all speaking different words, but acting as if they were one. "Thank you, Naruto. I'm glad that you came to join me in my trip, but I am also disappointed because of it," the voice said sadly, looking down at the ground. Naruto frowned and took another step over to the person. "What's wrong, sensei? Did I do something wrong?" he asked the person, his voice not being muted because he didn't speak the name of his sensei. As both he and Anko looked at the person in confusion, it nodded as it kept its head down. "Yes, Naruto. You did do something wrong. You misused my teachings," the voice now said coldly, striking Naruto quickly. Naruto was fortunate enough to move so that she strike wouldn't hit his hurt, but the hand of the person hit his shoulder instead, causing him to spin backwards and hit a tree. Naruto grunted with pain and kept his eyes on his sensei as it moved closer to him. Anko could only watch as the person picked up Naruto and looked him straight in the eyes. She had no access to her voice, and her legs were stuck to the ground, only allowing her upper body to move. She had tried to scream and yell and get his attention, but neither Naruto or his sensei acknowledged her existence. "What did I do? I'm sure that I can make it up. I didn't do anything at all." He tried to tell his sensei, but the person didn't do anything other than backing its head with Naruto's, then dropping the boy as soon as it pulled its head back. Although Naruto was losing consciousness, the person spoke to Naruto in the same cold voice as before. "Exactly. You did nothing. You are a disgrace and a monster. Even with the power you contain, you are nothing. Useless when they find you, I will be long gone, and I expect for whoever is looking for me will kill you just to get you out of everyone's way." The being said as it kicked Naruto in the head and ran away at speeds that only a Sannin could have. Anko was enraged at the person who hurt Naruto, but also worried since she knew whoever would find him would surely finish the job. Suddenly, her legs began to move again, and she quickly ran over to Naruto and held him in her arms. He was a little taller than she had remembered him to be, but it still felt like him. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, crying and trying to wake him up, but the next thing she knew he was back in her bed, covered in sweat in the covers that she was sleeping under now on the ground. The memories were too real for her, and she replayed them in her mind constantly. Naruto looked so heartbroken when his sensei had told him that it was disappointed. She assumed that he had put a lot of trust into his sensei, and all of a sudden she was out cold and left to die. Her eyes widened even further as she came to the realization that it was impossibly similar to when she had last seen Orochimaru, but he was in her place, and his sensei was literally anyone, as all of the voices she had heard were from people that she knew. She struggled to continue thinking about it, but she knew that it was the key to answering the question that her Hokage had given her. It was so much like her own ordeal, but at the same time it was different. She knew inside that she couldn't let something like that happen to him, and she knew that she couldn't let him turn out like she did. As she told herself the night before, she began to clean up her apartment after eating breakfast, planning on getting the place clean enough for another person to move in. Anko hoped that the Hokage would allow her to take in the little gaki and spent more than enough time practicing what she was going to say while cleaning. After having felt that her apartment was fine for the time being, he smiled to herself and took a brief shower before getting new clothes and heading out. Even though she appeared tough as nails and borderline psychotic on the outside, she wasn't really as mean as she seemed. She had to make an image for herself to prove the village wrong about her, and if that meant not being able to look at things that were even a tiny bit frilly in public, then so be it. It was still fairly early in Kanagakure, and although Anko usually wouldn't be up at the current hour, but she had business to attend to. He had some things to talk to the Hokage about, as well as the fact that she needed to see if Naruto had gotten better since the night before. Kakashi and Yugao had both told her that the Kikbi wasn't helping Naruto's healing process, and she only hoped that the fox would finally decide to help now. While busy with her thoughts, Anko wasn't able to see the young girl that she had just bumped into. Looking down at the girl with a bit of surprise, she kept her face somewhat blank while she studied her. The girl did the same and said nothing, but her face said that she did recognize Anko. Anko looked down at the girl and couldn't help but notice the two large red fang-like tattoos that were on both sides of her face. She currently had 3 pups with her, with one of them being on her head, another on her shoulder, and the last on the ground right next to her feet. Despite not having wild hair, slit eyes, or extended canines, Anko knew well that the girl was an Inyazuka. While the Inyazuka girl was about to say something, Anko placed a hand over her mouth just as her lips opened, and Anko shook her head softly. "Quiet," she said simply, giving the girl a more serious look. She couldn't place the girl's looks anywhere and sighed in defeat only seconds after ordering the girl to stay quiet. The snake mistress removed her hand from the girl's mouth and looked at her plainly. "Don't know you. You look a little too normal to be Inyazuka. No crazy hair, no crazy eyes, and no giant teeth. What's your name?" she asked to the girl, getting the Inyazuka to smile slightly. "I'm Hana Inyazuka. You're Mitarashi Anko, right?" she asked, getting a nod from the older woman. Anko wasn't sure how Hana knew her name, but before she could ask, Hana spoke again. "Ka-san said something about you. I can't remember what it was, but she was smiling, so it was a good sign." Anko was now wondering who her mother was, and lucky for her, Hana didn't interrupt her this time when she asked a question. "Who is your mother and how would she Tsume, huh?" Anko said flatly, knowing that there was no other Inyazuka that she knew around her own age group and she should have known that it was Tsume's kid from the start. Hana simply nodded at Anko with a small smile. "She is, and I'm sorry to leave, but I need to go and see Hokage-sama," Hana told Anko, snapping her fingers to get the pup that was on the ground to pay attention and follow her. Anko watched as the young Inyazuka walked away from her and to the Hokage tower. It was a coincidence that she was also going there, but to not seem like a weird stalker, she decided to change her route slightly to head on her way over to the hospital to check up on a certain young blonde. Chapter 4. The Meeting. Walking through the doors of the hospital, Anko lightly gazed around the lobby before heading to the front desk. The lobby was quiet, as only a few people were seated. Most of the chairs in the room were empty, and Anko assumed that the people there were sitting down because they needed to get checked or something along those lines. For the moment, it wasn't her business, so she simply continued walking to the desk. The young woman was seated on the other side of the desk, going through a rather small book. The woman's onyx eyes moved quickly past each line of text, taking up as much information as she could at the rate she was reading. The woman didn't notice Anko standing at the desk and only took note of the purple-haired woman after a random hand forcibly closed the book. An eep could be heard from the woman at the desk, her rolling chair moving back only slightly. Quickly, the woman set her book down and nodded at Anko. "Sorry about that. Can I help you?" Anko nodded in understanding and clanked over at the clipboard with the sign-in sheet for the visitors. "I'm here to see a friend. I brought him in last night and I want to see if he's gotten any better." She spoke in a calm and even tone, one that she didn't use all that often. The woman across from her nodded quickly and swiveled her chair so that she could grab the clipboard before handing it to Anko. The woman was curious as to who she was seeing, as she knew of Anko, but didn't know that she was good friends with anyone other than Kurina Yuhi and Yuga Yuzuki. "If you don't mind me asking, who are you seeing?" Anko looked up from the clipboard after signing in and paused for a moment. She wasn't sure how the woman would react to finding out that she was seeing Naruto, but mental shook those thoughts. Screw it. If she gets all prissy because I'm coming to visit him, then so be it. She thought to herself as she allowed the pen to fall in between her fingers and onto the desk which the clipboard was resting on. "Naruto Uzumaki," she said blandly, expecting for the woman's mood to suddenly change. Instead, she smiled sadly at Anko and remembered what she had heard just as she punched in for the day. "I heard that he was getting better, but he's still in pretty bad shape. He isn't in critical anymore, so that's good." Anko's eyes widened at the woman. She was one of the extremely few people who actually didn't see Naruto as the demon fox that was sealed inside of him. Immediately, she squinted her eyes and looked at the woman, wondering why she didn't seem to hate Naruto like the rest of the village. Why are you treating him differently than most of the village? She asked, getting the woman to tilt her head in curiosity. Normally, Anko would be thankful to find out that someone else saw Naruto as a person, but the woman seemed like a civilian woman or a rookie chunin. What do you mean? She asked, curious about what she was talking about. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There's no way you haven't heard about his tenant before. Everyone in the village knows about the fox and you're acting like you've never heard of it. She had to keep herself quiet. She couldn't make a scene in the hospital lobby and she knew that well. Oh. The woman simply said, taking back a clipboard and inspecting the most recent entry. Well, you see, I just don't think that it's possible for the Kikbi to take the former Naruto. If it had, the demon chakra would be felt throughout Konoha. When I went past his room this morning, I felt a little bit of it, but if he were actually the fox, there wouldn't be two distinct kinds of chakra coming from him. She said cheerily, getting a questioning look from Anko. The woman then rose from her chair and leaned across the counter and whispered to Anko. Between you and me, I think that the Kikbi is sealed inside of him. He could have had some of the demon chakra implanted in him at a young age, but I don't think that's possible. Anko had so many questions for the woman, but there were far too many to ask right now. Are you not from around here or something? Anko asked, trying to be as calm as possible with the woman. The nurse nodded and sat back down in her chair, smiling at Anko. How'd you know? I spent most of my life traveling with my family. Ka-san taught me how to be a med-nin, and Tu-san protected us while we traveled around the border. I've only been in Konoha for a month and I really like it here. Anko sighed to herself and looked down at the ground. She picked her head up once more as the nurse spoke again. Naruto is in room 304. Hokage-sama wanted him in a room high off the ground so that he couldn't escape through the window. Sorry for keeping you so long. The purple-haired woman nodded slowly and walked away from the desk, leaving the kind woman to her own devices. She was a little odd, but Anko didn't mind that at all. Even though she only met the med-nin, she had a feeling that she could be trusted. She was certainly smarter than just about all of the civilians in Konoha, and that was welcomed and appreciated. Anko walked through the white halls of the hospital and made her way to the third floor, where she assumed Naruto was put after he left the She could only hope that the fox was cooperating now, and from what the woman at the counter said earlier, she was being led to believe that Naruto was being healed by the previously mentioned fox. She quietly read off the numbers on the doors as she passed them, stopping as she found the room that Naruto was apparently in at the moment. It didn't seem like that woman would lead her on and tell her to go to the wrong room, but one could never know. With a light sigh escaping her lips, Anko reached her hand out and grabbed the handle of the door, twisting it and pulling it in her direction to open it. Walking in, the first thing she saw was the blindingly bright blonde hair of the young Uzumaki, who was resting peacefully in his bed. A soft smile graced her lips at the sight and she walked over to the side of the bed, pulling out a chair to sit on. Wake up soon, Gaki. Because when you do, your life's getting a whole lot better, Anko thought to herself as he sat next to Naruto, simply watching him inhale and exhale. He looked so much better than he did when she had found him, and she knew that only the Kikbi could have done something like that. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, just watching over the boy, but suddenly, she spoke up and broke the silence. You don't have to sit in the shadows like that. It's probably pretty uncomfortable from where you two are. Neither of the Anbu were really surprised to hear that Anko knew that they were there, but they were both curious about how long she had known on their presence. The Inu and Nico masked Anbu left their stations in the shadows, knowing well that Anko would pull them out if need be. Suddenly, Anko smiled sweetly at the two of them and talked in a voice far too sweet for comfort. While Nico wasn't as affected as Inu was, she was still quite scared of the Chunin woman in front of her. Now, tell me exactly why you two didn't jump in and save the Gaki as soon as it started getting dicey. Neither of them had anything to say to Anko. They were both ashamed for not helping him sooner and had no reason to not protect him other than just because Anko understood this, and after a while, she broke the silence once more. Under no means was she completely forgiving them for what they did. She was pissed at them to no extent and she wanted their masked heads on spikes. She kept that to herself, however, and tried to stay calm. Alright then. Just do your damn jobs the next time this happens, otherwise I'll have to step in again, I may even chew the two of you out to dolphin. Her sweet smile quickly shifted to a shit-eating grin as soon as the dolphin Anbu was mentioned, making both Inu and Nico pale under their masks. Dolphin had only been in the Anbu for a little more than a year, but that wasn't to say that he wasn't skilled. With his speed and tracking skills, he's probably one of the few that could ever catch Naruto if the case were to ever rise. He wasn't an Anbu captain like Inu was, but Dolphin sure acted like one. He had sparred with Inu a few times and the dog-masked ninja would win by smaller margins each time. At the rate he was at, he'd be equal to Kakashi in a few years. You don't have to do that, Anko. We've learned our lesson. He'd have our heads for not doing our jobs correctly. Nico spoke up, her mask directed at Anko. Neither of the purple-haired women understood how they could talk perfectly fine under those fairly thick Anbu masks, but Nico had assumed that it was some kind of seal or something. She's right. We'll be watching him better from now on. Inu spoke as well and paused for a moment, thinking about why Anko was there. Why are you here, Anko? Something important must have happened for you to go this far for him. While some would have taken that as some form of an insult, Anko simply nodded. She understood what Kakashi was getting at. She was always as tough as nails and hardly ever cared about anyone other than herself. She didn't favor kids in the slightest and she was well known for being bloodthirsty. That was only her mask, and if those were her true emotions, then she probably would have gotten mad at the silver-haired Anbu for saying that. A lot of things happened, Kakashi. That's all you need to know for now. Her smile disappeared and was replaced with a calm and serious look. Her voice also lost most of its usual cockiness and power. Kakashi sighed and shook his head. It might be just the four of us in here, but you know the rules. You can't use my name when I have the mask on. Anko then smirked at her mask-wearing friends and stood still. You're right. Sorry about that dog face. I'll make sure to remember that. Her cocky tone was back and both Inu and Nico sighed at the smirking young woman. It was obvious that she didn't want too into the details of what made her go to the hospital, so they kept quiet about it. All three conscious heads turned to the door as someone knocked on it from the other side. Anko stood up and walked over to the door and opened it, revealing another Anbu. The mask turned to face the woman at the door and the Anbu bowed lightly. Anko-san. Hokage-sama is wondering if you've gathered your thoughts about taking in the Uzumaki boy. I understand that it's been less than a day, but the Hokage believes that you already have your reasoning. The voice from the third Anbu sounded blank and monotone, but Anko still knew that whoever was behind the mask didn't favor Naruto all that much by the pause that he made when announcing his name. Anko nodded to him and glanced back at Inu and Nico, who were both looking at her curiously. Tell him that I'll be on my way as soon as I'm done here. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes at the most. The Anbu quietly said hi and bowed once more before leaving. Anko turned back around to her two masked friends and sighed audibly. You heard him. I asked a Hokage if I could watch over the boy. I'm going to leave it at that for now. She told them, walking back over to her seat and sitting down next to Naruto. The purple-haired woman smiled at him kindly before getting up and walking out the door without another word. In this time, Inu and Nico both got back into their spots in the shadows. Wake up soon, Gaki. It didn't take long for Anko to arrive at the Hokage Tower, as the tower was connected to the hospital and it was only a short walk. Because of what the Anbu had told her, she already knew why the Hokage was summoning her and she knew his reasoning for calling her to him only a few hours after they had last spoken. She was sure that she knew his reasons for sending the Anbu, but there was always a chance of her being wrong. There had been several times in her life where she believed one thing and another thing happened, being wrong was always a possibility. Entering the Hokage Tower, Anko said nothing to the secretary as Anko was supposed to be there and wasn't asking to see the village leader. She didn't like the secretary, even though she didn't really show any hate towards Anko. The snake mistress just had an odd feeling about her and decided not to talk to her unless she was needed, which was highly unlikely. The two simply shared a glance and that was that. Anko walked up to the Hokage's office at her own pace and was faced with the Anbu from earlier, the one that had told her about her summons to the office. Apparently he was supposed to escort her to the office, but he and Saratobi knew that she didn't really need an escort of any kind. The woman eyed the Anbu suspiciously and walked over to the door, her eyes never leaving his mask. Finally speaking up, curiosity was obvious in her voice. Why are you here? Don't have anything against you, but shouldn't you be back at your post or something, not just standing around here? The Anbu didn't move, but still replied to the curious woman. Hokage-sama told me to stay here and not let anybody other than you inside. Since you're discussing matters about Uzumaki, he wants his office guarded just in case anybody overhears or tries to listen in. Privacy seals will be put in place when you walk in, allowing you to speak at any volume you without attracting attention. I see. Well, thanks. Was all that Anko said before knocking on the door to the office. After a brief moment, a faint enter could be heard from the other side. The doors opened to reveal the Hokage sitting like usual, looking at Anko with a calm smile. Something seemed different to her. The atmosphere of the room wasn't like it was before. She couldn't explain it, but something had indeed changed within the last 13 hours. Before we get to Naruto-kun, Anko, I think that there is another matter that we should discuss while you're here. The Hokage said to her calmly, looking at her and examining her face. Curiosity was written all over it as she stepped closer, the door shutting behind her. Anko wondered what he was talking about, as not much of anything had happened between her saving Naruto and now, but she was going to listen to her leader. And what would that be? She asked curiously, preferring to stand at the moment rather than sit. The atmosphere still felt odd to her and she didn't want to get comfy at the moment. Hana Inyazuka came into my office a few minutes ago to give her report of her most recent mission. The rest of her team is relaxing from their mission and she took it upon herself to give the report to me. The Sarutobi elder paused to allow the information sink in, his smile widening as the look on Anko's face told him that she had recently encountered the girl. I see. Did something go wrong? I don't see the reason for telling me all of this. She wasn't really sure why the Hokage was talking about the girl to her, but she was sure that he was getting to that. Nothing went wrong, but she told me that she was held back from doing so because of an odd purple-haired woman that dressed weird and smelled of snakes, if I remember her words right. I just wanted to clarify with you that a meeting between the two of you took place before she came to the tower. A small smile could be seen on the face of the elder Sarutobi as he looked at Anko, whose eyes widened as a look of anger spread across her face. Anko was more amused than mad at what Hana had said to the Hokage and only put on the look of anger as a show for the silent Anbu hiding in the shadows. Not long after, though, she calmed down and smiled at the Hokage. She nodded to him before speaking. Yeah, I ran into her earlier today, but I don't think that I held her back long enough for her to have the need to apologize to you. Sarutobi nodded back to her with his usual smile and remembered what had happened once the Inyazuka girl apologized to him. I agree with you. There wasn't really any reason for her to apologize, but she insisted on doing so. He paused once more before clearing his throat, bringing his thoughts to the main topic of their meeting. I do understand that it had been a day, Anko, but I know how fast you think and I assume that you have come to your decision. He said to her, getting the snake mistress to don a calm and serious look as she looked at the leader of the village. She hesitantly nodded to him, pausing because of doubt. Can I really do this? Killing people is one thing, but taking care of a kid is another. Not to mention one who is probably a mental wreck on the inside, she thought to herself, refusing to speak at the moment. She didn't think that she was ready to take care of him, despite all of her earlier thoughts. She was a mess. Even under the mask that she hid under. She didn't think that she was ready, but she had to be. Nobody else would care for the boy in the way that he needed to be cared for, and Anko Mitarashi wasn't one to back down from things that even Kage feared. The fire lit in her eyes as she gave the Hokage a look of determination. Her nervousness and fear was gone, now replaced by shining determination. I will take care of Naruto Uzumaki. The Hokage's smile widened as he heard those words, and the old man pulled out a scroll from his desk. It was the document that would legally sign Naruto over to her, and all he needed is her signature and a blood sample. The sample was a new addition, as it was just to make sure that it was actually her signing the paper instead of someone else. Hiruzen placed the scroll on the desk and motioned for Anko to take it. While she moved forward and took the scroll, the old man moved a brush over to her so that she could sign the document. Anko read through the paper carefully to make sure that everything was in order. Naruto would be moved out of his currently residence and would be placed wherever Anko lived. She would become his guardian until he became of age or reached the Chunin rank. After that, he would be allowed to move out to continue his life, but she would still be his guardian and would be referred to if anything were to happen to him. She nodded as she reached the end of the paper, but stopped and looked back at the last few lines. The guardians of Naruto Uzumaki will be given full access to the clan and all of its belongings once Naruto Uzumaki reaches the Chunin rank. He or she they will also hold the council seat if Naruto Uzumaki is unable to attend. She looked up at the Hokage curiously and the old man chuckled as he knew what she was curious about. That will be explained later, Anko. If you wish to know more about the segment, please meet me later when the walls are less likely to have ears. He spoke carefully as he pulled out another scroll, watching Anko nod and take the brush to sign her name. He moved slightly when she bit her thumb to draw blood instead of using a kunai or other bladed weapon. He watched as her blood dripped from her thumb to the paper glowing for a moment before returning to normal. Anko was once again curious as she watched the paper glow. She assumed that it was a seal of some sort and something else would have happened if it wasn't her blood that was dropped on the paper. She said nothing as she rolled the scroll back up and placed it back on the desk, taking the other scroll from Hiruzen. Read that one when you have the time, Anko. Not here. He said to her, getting her to nod slowly as she put the scroll away. Anko and the Hokage waited in silence for several minutes, the former thinking about what she would need to do to take care of Naruto. The old Sarutobi simply watched Anko for a moment before giving her another smile. I'm glad that we were able to give Naruto a home. I'm sure that you have things to do before Naruto is released from the hospital, so I'd hate to be keeping you. Good day, Anko. He spoke to her, getting her to snap out of her thoughts and re-enter reality. Yes, Hokage-sama. I'll see you later. She said, giving him a short bow before turning away from him and walking out the door. Anko was curious to know what was in the other scroll that Hiruzen had given her. The way he spoke after she had reread the last lines of the first scroll and how he spoke after she had gotten the second one was odd and she replayed the words over in her head. Where the walls don't have ears read it when I have time. It's obvious that he wanted to speak privately about what those last sentences meant and this scroll has something to do with it, but what kind of secret would warrant that much caution from the Hokage? Sure, he might be old, but he can still kick major ass if he needed to. She wanted to look at the scroll right now, but even though she wanted to, she knew that it would better to wait until she was back home. She had planned to do a couple of things first, but they could wait. Walking back to her house, Anko was left alone to be with her thoughts. She still had doubts about raising Naruto, but she didn't know who else was going to do it and she couldn't just pass him on to be someone else's problem. She had been so occupied with her thoughts that she didn't realize that she was home until she almost ran into the front door. The house that Anko lived in wasn't run down, it wasn't a mess, and it wasn't anywhere near what people expected from her. The snake woman had a fairly nice house that was near the edge of the village. It had a simply tan coloring to the outside walls, and it was for the most part bare with the exception of a few windows and the door. The young woman unlocked the door without any problems and closed it behind her. Just about everyone assumed that she lived in a hellhole with torturing devices, rotting pieces of flesh, and many other inhumane things. Actually, it was a fairly nice and well-furbished home. Tan was the primary color, with grays, blacks, and purples in various other places to keep it from being monotonous. Many of the pictures on the walls of her with her two main friends, Yugao Yuzuki and Kurina Yuhi. She could be seen smiling, laughing, and even a few not long after the results of her pranks. While she didn't prank all that much, when she did, the town was often in ruins because of them. Plopping down on her couch, Anko pulled out the scroll from her trench coat and opened it up, reading through it slowly to not miss anything important. She could have easily read through it quickly and still memorize all of it, but she just wanted to read it slowly at the moment. Anko. I'm so glad that you were willing to become Naruto's guardian. I know that you weren't happy when finding out that I had turned down many capable clans who also wanted to watch over Naruto, but I do have my reasons. Without doubt, I'm sure that you noticed the last few lines of the document. I hand-wrote this document myself because it is far more important than people will realize. I want to talk more about it with you tonight at the Hokage mansion, where I'm sure that nobody will be able to listen into the conversation except for us. I know that it seems a little excessive, but it is absolutely necessary. I'm going to have Naruto stay at the hospital for a few more days, as it should give you time to prepare living with him. He needs a parent in his life, Anko. Despite what you think, I'm sure that you can be there for Naruto when he needs you. Sarutobi Hiruzen, Sandaime Hokage. Chapter 5. The Other Meeting. The sun was finally starting to set in the village of Konohagakure, and very few people could be happier about that than Mitarashi Anko. There were several reasons behind her joy, the main one being that she could soon go to the Hokage to talk to him about something that seemed to concern Naruto and a council seat. The precautions that he took to make sure that only Anko saw the message that he had given her were enough to tell her that this was important and in the wrong hands this information could cause chaos. While thinking of that, she also wondered why Hiruzen had chosen her out of all people to watch over Naruto. She didn't even truly know why she had offered to become his guardian. As the day passed, she thought more about it and believed that she was close to coming to a conclusion. The snake mistress was one of the few people who could truly connect with Naruto. She had felt the village's wrath much like he did and knew what it was like to be alone. She saw a bit of herself in him and didn't want for him to be corrupted by the village any more than he already was. She could see his mask as if it were a physical object and she knew that underneath that mask was a hurt and tormented boy who was treated badly for reasons he didn't understand. All it takes is one well-placed strike to shatter his mask and his soul to reveal the monster they took him as. If no one intervened, it was only a matter of time before the Kikbi took over his body and decimated Konoha. She understood his pain and she could put an end to it. This had been one of the longest days of her life. While she did kill some time by buying food for both Naruto and herself, she had spent most of the day cleaning her house to the point where a single speck of dust wasn't on the ground and waiting as patiently as she could for the day to pass. Getting ready to grab some dinner for both her and possibly the boy she would now be raising, Anko heard a knock at the door. It could have only been a few select people, as nobody really came out to see her. When she got to the door, the snake mistress opened the door to see her red-eyed friend on the other side. She was dressed like the normally was, with her wild and long black hair going down her back and her dress mimicking the thorns of a rose. Judging by her slightly fatigued appearance, as well as the fact that she was lightly panting, Anko could tell that she had run from wherever she was before to Anko's home. "Kurenai, what brings you over to my little neck of the urban woods?" Anko asked with obvious curiosity. "The cat told me that you were becoming a parent." She replied with a rather bland tone of voice, but a small hint of something else was also in her voice. Anko couldn't tell exactly what it was, but she was sure that it was excitement. Anko nodded slowly, cursing under her breath at Yugao. Yugao didn't gossip all that much, but when her friends were involved, the chances of her talking about something raised noticeably. With Naruto involved as well, the chances were raised even higher. What of it? She replied simply, unhappy with Yugao at the moment. She was going to get her back, and she was going to get her back good. Guranai slowly showed herself in. She and Anko had been friends for so long that just appearing at one another's house wasn't uncommon. A few things, actually. She said calmly. I don't want to be mean, Anko, but are you sure that you can do this? You've worked so hard to raise people's respect for you, and you'd be back at square one or even lower if this goes through. Also, you aren't really known for being friendly to kids, or most genin for that matter. The Ice Queen of Konoha was using her analytic voice, and she really wasn't trying to be mean to her friend. She was right though, on both points. If she were to take in Naruto, their combined reputation would be horrible, and she wasn't really fond of children. However, these were the wrong details to focus on. Anko knew better than to take what Kurenai said directly. She might have been using her analytic voice, but there was always more to it than that when she was involved. Anko shook her head at her friend, following her into her house and closing the door behind her. I'll be fine, Nai-chan. And you're going to have to be more persuasive if you want to take care of him as practice before you get busy with Asuma. She finished with a smirk and a teasing voice. With Anko's last words, Kurenai blushed lightly and shook her head at her friend. That's not what this is about. Anko, taking care of a kid is a huge responsibility, and with all of the life-threatening missions you take, every day you spend with him might be your last. Yes, if you go through with this, helping you take care of him would help me for the future, but everything you've done, everything you've worked for, will have been for nothing. Anko gritted her teeth in anger. Her friend meant good, but she wasn't doing any. She was insulted by her friend, the person that was supposed to be there for her when she needed her most. And now that she did, she wasn't there for her. Then so be it. She practically shouted. He is a time bomb, Kurenai. He smiled his way through every cruel and painful day, but what happens when he snaps? All of the anger that the village had showed him will be returned tenfold, and with the rage of the Kikbi to go along with it. I can't let that happen. I can't let him turn into what I almost was. She finished in a whisper, and her eyes were fixed on the ground as she thought back to when she had almost fully become the deadly and bloodthirsty woman everyone believed that she was. Of course, she was actually like that, but not to the extent that she showed everyone. It was silent for a few minutes, and Kurenai simply stared at her best friend. After some time, Kurenai smiled at Anko, put a hand on her shoulder. She didn't say anything, but her smile told Anko that she was going to help her however she could. Kurenai saw the fire in her eyes when she spoke. Anko truly wanted the boy to be happy, and she was willing to give up everything she had worked on for his happiness. The Ice Queen knew that she and Yugao saved Anko from becoming an insane sadist. She had seen the boy a few times, and every time she passed him, she would always see him smile and walk through the streets like the glares and whispers didn't exist. Only Kami knows what would happen if he were to snap. Even the Kikbi would run when a good man goes to war. Asuma's going to be surprised in the future when he sees how well I take care of children. Kurenai said quietly, getting a smile from Anko. That's if you stop crushing on him and make a move. Anko replied with a smirk. She knew how her friend could be sometimes. Kurenai sighed and kept her eyes locked onto Anko's. Her friend was truly willing to throw everything away for the boy, even though she had only just met him the day before. You know, as a friend, I can't let you go through something like this half-assed. I needed to see for myself that you were truly willing to do this. She knew her friend well, and there were a few times that she had acted without thinking beforehand. She just wanted to make sure that this wasn't one of those times. Thank you. I'd love to talk more, but I'm expected somewhere soon. I'll see you later. Anko did want to talk more to her friend, but there wasn't really much else to talk about, considering that not much had happened recently, other than what was already said. Even if she did continue her conversation, she believed that she shouldn't speak about the Hokage telling her to meet her at the Hokage mansion, to speak about secrets involving Naruto and whatever family gave birth to him. If the Hokage wanted this to be spoken in one of the safest buildings in Konoha, then anything more than what she already said shouldn't be spoken out loud. Kurenai also wanted to talk a bit more, hoping to find out what Anko planned on doing with a child, especially one as young and impressionable as Naruto. Hopefully the boy wouldn't turn out as crazy as her now stepmother, but it was completely possible. The tone that Anko used told the Genjutsu mistress that, well, whatever she was doing was important and should probably not leave the mouths of the people discussing it. Anko would bring it up to her as she really needed to. If she didn't, then she would learn in time along with the rest of their friends. The two young women walked out of the house, and Kurenai waited for Anko to lock the place down before speaking up. Well, I'll see you later then. She said, giving her friend an honest smile. You'll be that boy's world, you know. She said as she walked off, only barely being able to see the honest smile that her friend gave back to her before she headed off as well. Minutes later, Anko arrived at the Hokage mansion. The building was not far off from the academy and the hospital and looked quite similar, in fact. The main thing that stood out were the two guards who stood in front of the place. While normally the Hokage's residence would be under the protection of seals and the Hokage herself, Hiruzen lived in the Sarutobi clan house and not the mansion. He needed the forbidden scrolls to be watched at all times because he was not normally around. Upon reaching the gates, Anko was faced with two Anbu guards who both wore armor that, while built exactly the same, was colored different to make them stand out among others. These were special Anbu who guarded the mansion, who were above the usual cut and were tasked with guarding the secrets of Konoha. As she walked up to the two of them, both Anbu stood perfectly still until she was only a few feet away from them. Once she was close enough, they both moved to the sides of the front gate and opened it for her. She didn't even have a chance to speak as they talked first. Okage-sama ordered for us to let you in when you get here. The one to her right spoke. She opened her mouth but was cut off by the one to her left. It'll be just you and him talking. Other Anbu will put multiple seals around the room and the rest of the house so that nobody can listen in. The other one spoke. Anko nodded her head and opened her mouth once more, only to get cut off again. When it concerns Naruto-san, Hokage-sama is willing to go to great lengths as a way to apologize for how he's been treated in the past. She nodded once again and didn't even bother opening her mouth as she expected for them to talk again to answer the last question in her head. She stood there for a full minute, not uttering a single word, the Anbu did also. She believed she was safe and opened her mouth again. Body language and common sense, Anko-san. The Anbu answered together, both wearing unseen smiles on their masked faces. Without a word, Anko simply huffed and walked through the gates, hearing the masked nin trying to hide their laughter from her. She was sure that they thought that she was going to do something to them, and they were right. As she stepped into the building, two screams could be heard behind her, as well as some inhuman hissing. Anko hadn't been in the Hokage mansion before or the Sarutobi clan house. She hadn't had any reason to visit the Hokage or his family in his own time. The building itself was clean and dustless. It was odd considering that the Hokage didn't use the place all that much unless he was going through one of the forbidden scrolls, which never happened, the place was untouched, with the exception of the Anbu who didn't leave any traces of their presence. The main room was what she expected. Rather large with space to fit a few people from each of the main clans at once. It could almost be considered some sort of a party or meeting room due to the space and the seating. Sarutobi Hiruzen was sitting down at one of the end seats, sipping on what could have been either sake or some sort of really dark tea. The old man looked up upon hearing Anko walk in and kept a soft gaze on her as she took in the area. Once she processed his presence, he smiled at the young woman and stood up, placing the cup down on the table in front of him. "Hello Anko, I see the guards are keeping themselves entertained," he asked rhetorically, knowing by the screams of pain he had heard only seconds ago was her doing. Anko smiled and chuckled nervously, all while scratching the back of her head. "They're pretty good at their job. I'm not usually an easy person to see through," she said, respect for them hidden in her words as she glanced behind her. Hiruzen chuckled as well and motioned for her to follow him while he went into another room. She wordlessly nodded and followed, watching as the old man took long and calm strides to wherever they were heading to. "So, can I ask what this is all about? I mean, the paper they let. When we activate the seals, then you can begin your questions." The Hokage cut her off, not even looking back at her as he led her through a maze of hallways, ending at a room that was at the end of a hallway. Hiruzen slowly opened the door and walked through it, motioning for Anko to come through as well. He didn't need to, but it acted as a signal to tell her that they were where they were supposed to be at. As predicted, she followed and entered the door before he did, allowing him to close the door behind them both. There was a small pause between the door closing and the Hokage actually speaking. During the pause, a small pulse of chakra was emitted by one of the Anbu to tell him that the seals were in place and he could talk freely to Anko without worry of people overhearing their conversation. Breaking the silence, Hiruzen started first. "Anko, what I am about to tell you is of the utmost importance. Until it is revealed to the public by myself, you are not allowed to tell anyone about anything that it's spoken about in this room, do you understand?" He used a tone of authority that he didn't use often, showing the true ninja that he still was inside of an old man's body. Anko nodded to the village leader and stayed silent, allowing for him to continue speaking. "In the paper that you signed, signing over Naruto-kun over to you, it stated that you will be given a seat on the council. I have no doubt in my mind that section of the paper had been running through your head, at least for a little while." At this, Anko just continued to nod. It also stated that he will get all of his clan items once he reached the rank of Chunin or reaches the age of consent if he does not choose to be a ninja. Hiruzen highly doubted that Naruto wouldn't be a ninja, as it was in his blood to do so. Naruto does have a clan, Anko. In fact, he actually has two. The old monkey stated, causing Anko's eyes to go wide. She assumed as much, considering that the part about the clans wouldn't be in the paper if he didn't belong to one. But she couldn't believe that he had two clans. With that kind of position, he could be as important as the Hyuga clan or the Uchiha clan. Her hands clenched in anger as she looked at the ground, scowling fiercely at the hardwood floor underneath her. She couldn't believe it. He had the power of two clans, and Hiruzen was making him leave off the streets. Why, she choked out, trying to keep herself from lashing out at the old man, who just stood there, unchanging. Why are you letting him live like this? She shouted at her leader, unable to hold back the rage she currently had for him. It had only been a day, but that boy had in fact managed to become her world. She didn't know how it happened, and she didn't question it. His image gave her clarity, power over the curse mark that echoed dark whisperings throughout her mind. He was her hope. Hiruzen simply looked down, a frown on his wrinkly face as he thought about what the boy had been through. I will explain. He said quietly, lifting his head a moment later to look at the enraged and hurt Anko. She gave him the look that told him that she would attempt to kill him if he didn't start explaining. Take in Naruto's appearance and attitude. Think back on every moment you saw of him. He stated to her, his face going neutral once more. Who looks like he does and who acts like he does. Anko tried her best to calm herself down. She needed to think about this, think about all the times she had seen and heard Naruto. His sun-kissed blonde hair, his eyes that were as blue as the ocean, filled with curiosity and wonder. He shouted about becoming Hokage, and if he wasn't doing that, he was stuffing his face with ramen noodles from the Ichiraku ramen stand. He was as stubborn as a bull with the intelligence to match, but at times he could be unnaturally smart and understanding. He never stopped doing what he loved and followed his heart. There were a number of people who had those characteristics, but one face made everything click in her head. Beyond aim, she whispered, her eyes wide once more. It all made sense. He was married to Kushina, who shared the Uzumaki name. Her clan had a spot on the council since Uzushio was decimated and brought to ruins. It didn't last long, as once Kushina died and Naruto took her name, they immediately removed her seat from the council to keep Naruto from getting his hopes up. Minato Namikaze's name was brought to clan status once he became a Hokage, as he wasn't a part of a clan beforehand. Anko didn't know either of them personally, but she had talked to them on occasion. Naruto looked just like his father and acted like his mother. It was odd how nobody had noticed it before. Shikaku probably knew about it taking his intelligence into account, but probably didn't care when taking his laziness into account as well. Hiruzen nodded slowly and looked at Anko with a small smile. He knew that she understood now, that he had reasoning behind not bringing Naruto's heritage into light. Being the child of the man who killed countless Iwa shinobi and no doubt many more, and the woman who was the remnants of a great clan and village of sealing masters, who was also gifted with the ability to use chakra chains, there would be a high price on his head in the eyes of any shinobi. The Hokage decided that this would be a good time to bring Anko back into the physical world and began to speak. He would be one of the most wanted shinobi in the world if that were to get out, which is why I never brought up his heritage to him before. Anko's head snapped to face Hiruzen, staying quiet so that he could continue speaking. If I were to tell everyone about his heritage, especially at this young age, the entire village would be at his beck and call, willing to do anything for him simply because he is the son of the Yondaime. There is a great chance that it would make him arrogant and use his family name as a means to get what he wants. The civilians of the village would throw themselves at him as a way to apologize and most likely see you unfit for raising him. They do not see what I see, what most of the shinobi on the council see. He is not a demon child and he is not the Namikaze heir. He is Naruto Uzumaki. He is who he is because of what he has done and what he has seen, not because of whom he is related to. I believe that you will do well in helping him stay leveled when his heritage is revealed. His speech made Anko feel a little better about the situation. As she wasn't from a council clan, she would be one of the best choices for being the parent of Naruto. He and Anko would have to worry about clan problems and things now, but they wouldn't be on his head until he was ready to take over. She could also bring a somewhat new perspective into the view of the people on the council. Half of the council consisted of shinobi, so just about every perspective was already seen and considered, but her actions and decisions could be overlooked much more easily because she wasn't from a clan herself and had no clan experience beforehand. In a way, they had political freedom in most situations. She knew the rules and laws that applied to being a Konohinin, and she had to abide by those like everyone else, but she didn't know or understand the unspoken political rules. She never had any want, desire, or need to know them. She was being placed on the spot as the temporary matriarch of the Uzumaki and Namikaze clans and was to be given leeway in the political world because of it. Naruto was just a boy. He probably wouldn't be able to understand it even if he wanted to, and therefore was given freedom from politics as well. There was another pause, but it wasn't Hiruzen who spoke next. With the topic of Naruto and the clans, Anko decided to keep with that and ask a related question. When will the public know? She asked a Hokage, curious to know what his new plan for going about this was. I will tell the Shinobi Council during their next meeting, not at the joint meeting where the council can have their say. The ninja clans will be much more understanding than the civilian ones, and they will know along with the rest of the public in a few months. That will give you and Naruto-kun time to get used to living with each other. At this, Anko nodded her head. She didn't know that the old monkey already had a specific date for revealing his heritage to the world. For another few minutes, the room is deathly silent. The information that was given out had gravity, and neither of the ninja in the room could pull their thoughts away from it. Anko didn't know what else to say anymore, but Hiruzen had one last thing to say to his now surrogate daughter. Anko. You know how important Naruto is to me, much more so now than before because of what was recently said. I'm not telling you as your Hokage, but I'm asking you as an old grandfather. Please, show Naruto the kind of love and compassion that the village has denied it. Kami knows that he could use it. Anko smiled at the old man and glanced at the door. Like before, she didn't have anything else to say and didn't think that she could say anything that wouldn't ruin what kind words the old man had told her. Hiruzen looked at the door as well and was sure that nothing more needed to be said at the moment. This was a hard pill to swallow, and after everything that had happened in the last 2 days, Anko needed some rest and time to think about everything, as well as prepare for the major change in her life that was already happening. Hiruzen sent out a wave of chakra to tell the Anbu to disable the seals, and only a few seconds later he felt a wave of chakra telling him that the seals were inactive. He walked over to the door and opened it, motioning for Anko to walk through. She did as she was told and walked out of the room, weaving through the hallways next to the Hokage so that the two of them could head home and get some rest. Once they reached the main door, Hiruzen and Anko were surprised to see a medic nin standing at the door. From her appearance, she was on edge about something and had presumably just ran from the hospital to the mansion. She panted lightly as she held onto a clipboard of some sort that was facing towards her body so that the Hokage and the snake mistress couldn't see what was on the other side. Is everything alright? You look a little winded. The Hokage spoke up, curiosity obvious in his voice. Hokage-sama. I have news about the Uzumaki boy that was left in our care. Something happened to him. She spoke urgently, knowing that the Hokage would want to know about this as soon as possible. People knew how he watched over the boy and anything concerning him would be brought to the Hokage first. What about Naruto? Anko asked, now a little worried as well since it did involve the boy that she was now taking care of. Hers and the Hokage's eyes would only widen in shock once hearing what the medic nin had to say. He's missing. Chapter 6. The Hunt. The Hokage and Anko were shocked to hear what the medic nin told them. They couldn't believe it. Not only was he missing, but neither of the Anbu assigned to him reported in about it. Instead, some random worker at the hospital told them about his disappearance. They could only wonder what happened to the three of them, but their imaginations didn't drift far off due to Hiruzen speaking. Anko, get to Naruto's house and wait there. I'll send an Inyazuka over to you so that Naruto-kun can be tracked. Soon after he spoke, the old man released a wave of chakra, signaling a nearby Anbu to their location. It was one of the special Anbu, as they were right next to the Hokage mansion. What do you need, Hokage-sama? The Anbu spoke, his dragon mask unmoving. Go to the Inyazuka clan and have Tsume meet Anko at Naruto's house. She should already know the way. He ordered the Anbu, who bowed to his leader and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. The old man simply glanced at Anko before watching her take off to Naruto's house. She knew where it was because she had visited it once earlier in the day as a way to pass time. Whatever happened, we will find you, Naruto. Several minutes earlier. Hokage-sama is going to kill us. Not if Anko does it first. Maybe they'll take turns beating us to death. Two masked Anbu jumped from rooftop to rooftop as they tailed a figure in front of them. He was unbelievably fast for his age and size, but it was probably due to all of the exercise he got from constantly running around. Not to mention that he had slipped away from the two on more than one occasion during their little chase. The one with the cat mask shook her head as she continued to run. No. Anko would torture us slowly and painfully, and then Hokage-sama would bring out an amazing jutsu to finish us off in the most gruesome way possible for allowing this to happen. That was most likely the best case scenario, with the worst case having them both being tortured and beaten by snakes and apes while being told to take better care of Naruto, being left with an inch of their lives so that they could recover and have the whole process be repeated again and again. No, it could probably get much worse than that. They had to move their focus away from the possible ways that they could be tortured and over to the person who was just in front of them but wasn't anymore. One moment he was on the rooftops like the Anbu were, but he suddenly disappeared from their line of sight. He probably dropped down into the streets below. While they now had the high ground, the person they were chasing could maneuver through the alleyways and crowds. He had a fair amount of knowledge of all the shortcuts and places that one could hide at, and his size allowed for him to fit just about anywhere. It was far too late for them to find Naruto and bring him back without any worries. They had been chasing the figure that was previously in front of them for several minutes now, and somebody was sure to notice that Naruto and his guards were in his room. The two Anbu dropped down to the streets below as well and had just dropped down in time to see the head of hair that they were looking for in a sea of brown, black, and other colors. They smirked under their masks and continued to chase after him. People seeing him and the Anbu run through the streets simply assumed that he had done something wrong like usual and didn't form the usual riot. It was odd, but appreciated by both the chased and the chasers. Not long after, they had managed to chase him into a denser part of the village, with thinner roads and several more dead ends. They knew that the chase was almost over. His movements were beginning to get a little slower and he didn't take every twist and turn available to him as well. They had to end this and capture him so that they could get Naruto and bring him back to the hospital. "Stop so we can end this," Yugao called out ahead of her. The person simply smirked and made an effort to move faster. "Not a chance. You'll have to capture me," he shouted back, the smirk never leaving his face as he continued to run, jumping back up to the rooftops to give himself a little space. Kakashi and Yugao continued to tail him, both sighing inwardly as they should have known that he wouldn't go back without a struggle. Kakashi threw several kunai in front of him. He wasn't trying to hit the person he was chasing. He was hoping that they would become an obstacle to him and make him either slow down or trip. As he planned, the person in front of them tripped over one of the kunai that had lightly dug itself into the roof and caused him to fall over and back down onto the ground. He was good, but not good enough. The person grunted as they hit the ground, glaring at the two figures who appeared before him. "That's not fair. You can't use kunai." Yugao shook her head at him, taking an unnoticed glance at Kakashi. "We can use any techniques at our disposal. You should be lucky I didn't decide to use my sword. That's a part of the rules," Yugao said, getting a nod from Kakashi. "Yeah. That's how it goes, and you could have been off much worse," he said to the person on the ground, who still looked up at them with anger. "You guys didn't say anything about rules," he shouted at them as he got up, brushing himself off. "Well, this is ninja tag. Even you should know how it goes, future Hokage-sama," Yugao said in an uncharacteristically kind and somewhat mocking voice. Kakashi nodded once more and looked around. It might have been too enclosed to see the sun, but the lighting of the area said what needed to be said. "And the sun hasn't gone down before you were captured, so we can't talk to the real Hokage-sama about letting you out of the hospital," he said, looking back down at the person in front of him. He was silent. He didn't want to accept his fate. He knew that he was beaten up pretty badly this time, and he knew that the Hokage would keep him up in the room for a month until he decided that he was healthy enough to move around again. He looked up in mild surprise when he felt a hand on his shoulder, which came from Yugao. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Naruto. Hokage-sama and Anko are probably worried sick. We didn't leave them a note or anything saying that we'd be with you. Let's get going." She took her hand off of his shoulder and began to walk back to the hospital and was followed by Kakashi and eventually Naruto himself. A little more than 2 hours ago, Naruto had woken up. He didn't know all the details about what happened, but he knew that he was beaten up and someone came to save him. Kakashi and Yugao filled him in on everything else and deeply apologized to him for what they had done or what they hadn't done. He accepted their apologies and asked them if he could leave the hospital as he was feeling much better thanks to the healing of the Kikbi added with his own Uzumaki blood. They had told him that they didn't have any say when it came to releasing him from the hospital and only the Hokage and the doctors and nurses assigned to him could do anything about that. After several minutes of complaining about it, a deal was made between the three. If Naruto could last until after the sun sets in a game of ninja tag, then Kakashi and Yugao would talk to the Hokage about possibly letting Naruto out of the hospital. If not, then Naruto would owe each of them a favor to be done sometime in the future. Looking back, neither of them knew why they agreed to it. They could get in serious trouble for giving the Hokage a scare involving Naruto, not to mention what Anko would probably do if he had gotten injured again. Luckily, he wasn't, and the bruise that he had gotten from the fall disappeared in only a few minutes. Hopefully the Hokage and Anko would have mercy on their souls. Present time. The dragon-masked guard of the Hokage appeared at the Inyazuka clan ground and knocked on the door to the main home. It did not take long for someone to open the door, and young woman there was quite surprised at seeing an Anbu at her home. The girl looked at the Anbu curiously and took a step back, allowing for him to come in. "What do you need, Anbu-san?" she asked politely, something uncommon for an Inyazuka to do. The Anbu simply stood where he was and looked at the girl before him. She had the marks of an Inyazuka, but she didn't look as feral as the others. She had a Konohagakure headband wrapped around her waist as a belt, telling him that she was at least a genin. Hokage-sama needs Tsume and Yuzuka to help in tracking down someone. It's an order by the Hokage. He said monotonously, as per the usual with him. The Inyazuka girl looked up at the Anbu and shook her head. Ka-san is out on a mission right now. I can help though. The triplets are really good at tracking. She looked into her home and whistled, causing 3 pups to scramble to their master. She then looked back at the Anbu and gave him a nod of assurance. Lead the way. Ryu stayed quiet for a moment, internally deciding on whether or not to take Tsume's daughter to the Uzumaki house in place of Tsume. She should have to do. The Anbu nodded back and began to run at a pace that the Inyazuka girl was capable of. It was still fairly fast, but it wasn't the Anbu's top speed. The 3 dogs all climbed onto the girl in various spots and held on as she began to run as well. It was a good pace for her and she was glad that the Anbu was going that slow for her. In little time, they arrived at the Uzumaki house. The Inyazuka girl had never been near this specific house before, as its old and beaten up appearance would have told her if she had been there before. When she got there, she noticed that there was a woman waiting in front of the door. She appeared impatient, almost frantic, and familiar as well. It didn't take long for her to recognize the older woman that was not in front of him. "Anko-san," she said with surprise. Anko couldn't have mistaken the girl for anyone else and was truly assured when she heard her voice. Wow, what a surprise. There was no sarcasm in her words, as she was actually feeling surprised inside. "Where's Tsume?" she asked, her franticness being heard in her voice. "She's out on a mission. I'm the next best thing." She wanted to assure these people that she was ready to do whatever the Hokage needed her mother to do. Anko sighed inwardly. She had to get to know more people than the 3 people she was always around. She was already on good terms with Tsume, so becoming friends with her shouldn't be too hard. "Alright, let's go. I need your pups to find Uzumaki Naruto, and as fast as possible. There's a whole bunch of stuff in his place that we can use for his scent," Anko told the Inyazuka girl as she practically kicked down the door. It was already beaten up and he wasn't going to be living there any longer, so it wasn't really a problem for her. Hana tilted her head in confusion and slight worry. "I don't think it's good to just break into his house, even if it is a means to find him." Anko shrugged her shoulder and began to walk around, looking at things and wondering what would be the best thing to get his scent from. "It doesn't matter. I'm his parent now and he's moving out of this dump as soon as possible." Hana just sighed and kept the triplets from going wild in a completely unmarked place. It had so many smells, but 2 of them stood out to her. Ramen and blood. "Aha!" Anko shouted, holding one of the several identical jumpsuits that Naruto had in his wardrobe. She handed it over to Hana, who took it and offered it to the Himari triplets, who sniffed the outfit several times before jumping off of Hana and yipping as they ran out of the house. "They already have his scent, let's go," Hana commanded, surprising Anko slightly. The 2 of them, along with the dragon Anbu, followed the pups all through the village to find a certain blonde-haired hero. The 3 ninja chased after the 3 pups as they followed a strong scent. The individual scents that mixed together to smell like Naruto were already strong on their own, but even more so when mixed together. They ran past the ramen stand, through several streets and alleyways, and over the rooftops. Whoever had Naruto was being chased. Hana noted as they ran. Anko nodded and followed the Inyazuka and her pups. No normal person would run in this pattern otherwise. There was a moment of silence between the 2 women, but Hana spoke up so that things wouldn't be awkwardly silent. "Anko-san, you said something about now being Naruto's guardian," she inquired, not knowing that a woman, who was probably around the age of 20, had a child of her own. Anko nodded to the girl. They had only just met earlier that day, and she had only vaguely heard about Anko from her mother, so there was a lot of unknown information about her in the eyes of Hana. "Yeah. I officially became his parent this morning. I thought that I'd have a few days to get ready for this, but something just had to happen." Hana nodded. She understood the situation somewhat, but not all that much because of her age. She had heard about Naruto from her mother as well, but wasn't sure what to make of him because of Tsume's reaction. When Hana heard her mother talking about the boy, she seemed angry and was muttering something about the Hokage in the council. If she would have focused more, she could have remembered what she said, but she wasn't all that interested at the time. Shortly after, the pups began to pick up speed. Hana knew this as a sign of them getting closer to their target. "Almost there," she said to the 2 older ninja around her, letting them know that they were close. The group of 6 dropped back down into the streets and continued to run, but the path that they were running in was much straighter than before. It was odd for the kidnapper to suddenly change tactics like that instead of continuing to weave around to make it harder to be tracked. The Himari brothers jumped up into the air and tackled someone, bring them to the ground. The person who had just been tackled by 3 small dogs was standing next to 2 other people who simply looked down at the 3rd member, their reactions hidden by a still face. The three pups didn't weigh all that much on their own, but together, they were able to tackle the small person they were tracking. The pups began to lick the person underneath them, moving all around as he laughed. Hey. Get off of me. He managed to get out. He looked up at his two companions and continued to laugh. Help me out here. Soon, the three ninja caught up to the dogs and were surprised to see what was going on. The Himari triplets were on top of Naruto, licking and smelling him all over. The boy was laughed uncontrollably and the two Anbu assigned to watch over him were standing at his sides, simply watching him and the dogs. Hana thought that the little blonde boy being attacked by her pups was simply the cutest thing in the world and sighed with a smile on her face as he stood a few feet away from him. Anko on the other hand was relieved to see him doing well and without a single scratch on his body. She knew that his Uzumaki blood and the Kikbi made him heal much faster than normal people, but it hadn't even been 24 hours yet and he was perfectly fine. Anko stopped next to Hana and Dragon stopped next to her. The snake mistress glared at the two Anbu who were currently as scared as physically possible. Can someone please tell me what's going on? She asked in a sickly sweet voice, only scaring Kakashi and Yuga more. Hana whistled and commanded the triplets to come back to her, which they did almost instantly. Slowly, Naruto stood up, looking at Anko curiously. That's her. Her? Naruto asked aloud. The Kikbi shook his head from inside the cage and continued to look through Naruto's eyes. Think, don't speak. You'll make these people think that we're even crazier than they already probably think. Naruto nodded his head and thought his words in his mind. Like this? He asked his tenant, who nodded in confirmation. Yes. You and I will talk like this. That woman, the crazy one, she's the one who saved you the other night. I believe you owe her thanks. Naruto stepped up to Anko and looked at her curiously. You're the lady who saved me? He asked her, truly wondering if this wasn't just some sort of trick. Anko smirked and looked down at the boy, pointing to herself with her thumb. That's right. I, Mitarashi Anko, saved you from the villagers. No need to thank Emwo. She said in surprise as she looked down at the boy who was now hugging her legs with an astounding amount of force. Thank you, he chanted out loud. He had done the same thing for the two Anbu when he first found out that they were watching over him. There was an astonishing low amount of people in the entire village that actually saw the boy as something other than the demon fox. Anko looked down at him, but with less surprise than before. Naruto, can you tell me what's going on here? And why you and these two are out here and not at the hospital? Her voice started off as normal, but went back to that sickly sweet tone as she neared the end of her question. The Anbu were scared once again and said nothing as they stood there. Slowly, Naruto let go of Anko and looked back at Kakashi and Yugao. Well, I woke up a little while ago and they told me what happened and that you saved me. I was feeling good and I wasn't hurting, so I wanted to go out. They said that I couldn't, but I said that if I can play ninja tag with them until sunset, then they'll talk to Gigi about letting me go home. He explained to her the situation, getting the two Anbu assigned to Naruto to sigh in relief. He then pouted and glanced at the Nico and Inu masks before looking back at Anko. But they cheated and used kunai to make me trip and fall off the roof. He said, pointing his fingers accusingly at the two of them, who began to sweat once more. Hana and Dragon simply watched the sight before them. Hana didn't think that a little boy like that could be too much trouble. He looked like a lost pup that just wanted a home. Anko sighed and cast her glare at the two Anbu. So, you two let him out of the hospital without telling anyone because of a bet, she yelled at them, her glare becoming fierce. It then changed to a smirk as they turned away. Dolphin is sure going to hear about this. Yugao then got on her knees and looked up at Anko. Please Anko. He'd kill us for this. She begged her friend. It wasn't like her at all, but in truth, Anko and Dolphin scared her a little. What do we have to do to keep this quiet? Kakashi asked, standing still and looked at his snake-using friend. You two will be helping me train Naruto. She said with confidence. She didn't plan this, but her attitude made it seem like she did. Kakashi shrugged and nodded, both saying fine. Simultaneously. Naruto looked up at Anko, curiosity still in his eyes. Train? He asked her. Anko nodded and knelt down to the boy, getting on the same level that he was. Yeah, train. A Hokage has to be a great ninja, right? She asked rhetorically, but still getting a nod from Naruto. Well, you've already taken the first few steps by managing to outrun Dogface and Nico here. She ruffled his hair and stood back up. Let's talk to the Hokage so we can head home. The sun had fully set and the sky was now being coated in a dark blue. It was starting to get late and a group of 5 ninja, 1 boy and 3 dogs, were walking through the streets of Konoha. Naruto and Anko walked up in front and behind them were Hana and Dragon. Yugao and Kakashi went back to hiding, watching over Naruto like they were supposed to. The Himari triplets were resting on Naruto's head and shoulders. They had taken quite a liking to him, it seemed, as they were fairly happy resting on him as he walked. Hana thought it was a cute sight to see a little boy with her pups and almost didn't want to ask for them back when she had to go. Almost. Anko didn't tell Naruto what she meant by we when she said that they would go home, and she only said that it was a surprise for when the Hokage officially released him from the hospital. He was persistent about knowing though and continued to ask her about it until they reached the Hokage mansion. "Can you please tell me?" "Nope." "Let's Anko sighed in annoyance. If he didn't stop, she would tell him right there to shut him up. Luckily, they had just reached the Hokage mansion. The old man was standing in front of the mansion like he had been when they had gotten news about Naruto being missing. He looked at the group as it approached and smiled at the sight of Naruto next to Anko. He would have preferred to not see the two of them arguing, but he was happy seeing him safe and sound. When they got close, the group stopped in front of the village leader to hear what he would have to say. Hiruzen first looked at Dragon, who looked back at the old man. "Thank you for helping, Dragon. You're dismissed." Dragon nodded and disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Hiruzen then looked at Hana with curiosity, tilting his head slightly at the sight of her and not her mother. "Hana, I'm thankful that you brought Naruto back, but can I ask about your mother? I asked for Dragon to get her." Hana nodded and bowed slightly. "Sorry, but she was out on a mission. Tracking a lost relative outside of Konoha." She explained to the village leader, who nodded and smiled. "Thank you, Hana. You will be paid B rank money for this mission." Hana bowed again and looked up at the old money. "Is there anything else, Hokage-sama?" she asked him, getting him to shake his head at her. "No, but if you would like to stay, you can. Your pups seem to have taken a liking to Naruto-kun," he said, glancing at the blonde boy who still carried the pups on his shoulders and head. Naruto smiled at Hana and glanced at the two on his shoulder. "They're so cool," he said somewhat quietly, knowing that the pups were either close to falling asleep or already there. This made Hana laugh a little, who just nodded at the boy and watched him look at the Ninken with amazement. Hiruzen then looked up at the sky expectantly and glanced at some nearby trees. "Inu, Nico. Please explain." The two Anbu agents appeared in front of the Hokage and bowed to him, quietly saying hi Hokage-sama at the same time. Yugao was the first to speak up. "Hokage-sama. A few hours ago, Naruto woke up and attempted to leave the room. We redirected him to his bed, but he insisted that he was fine and that he should be let go from the hospital. We managed to strike up a bet around a game of ninja tag where he would stay the hospital and wait if he was to lose and we would talk to you about releasing him if he won." She explained most of the situation but left out the part where Naruto would owe them a favor if he lost. Kakashi picked up where she left off. "We didn't expect for him to be as fast as he was. I can honestly say that he could outrun us with us going at a fairly fast pace. We only caught him because I used kunai to make him trip. If it was just running, he probably would have won. That boy had stamina like no other. Even Anbu get tired at some point, but when Anbu fell down after hours of rigorous training, Naruto would still be going at it." Hiruzen Sarutobi was silent for several minutes. He was sure that Kakashi and Yugao would be punished in some way for allowing Naruto to leave his hospital room without notifying anyone beforehand, but they had just graded the boy on endurance and possibly resourcefulness. He could truly become a devastating ninja in the future with the help of Anko, Kakashi, Yugao, and everything left by Kushina and Minato. The old man looked down at his surrogate grandson and smiled at him. He had made his decision and he hoped that Anko was ready for it. "Naruto-kun," he said calmly. Naruto looked up at the Hokage with curious blue eyes. "Yes, Jiji," he said back. "What are your thoughts on Anko?" It was a rather sudden question, as Naruto had only just met her, taking under consideration that he could hardly hear or see anything the other night when she saved him. The little boy hummed and thought for a whole minute. She seemed like a nice person from what she had said to him and she seemed pretty cool if she could make Inu and Nico fear her in an instant. Her devious eyes and dangerous smirk are what hooked him, though. She would be a great person to pull pranks with. "I like her, Jiji. She's really cool." The elder Sarutobi chuckled a little and glanced at Anko before returning his gaze to the boy. "Well, Naruto-kun. How would you like to live with Anko? You'll get to stay with her in her house and you'll also have another house where you can learn more about clans and someday taking my hat." Naruto couldn't have been happier at the moment. Not only did he now have two cool houses where he could learn to become Hokage, but he also had a mom. She looked a little young to be a mother, even in his eyes, but he believed that she could do it. Yes. 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 He said aloud, his eyes watering with happiness as he jumped in the air, accidentally causing one of the pups to fall off of his shoulder. He caught the pup and put him back on his shoulder. Hana, seeing one of the triplet falling off and being caught, was scared for a moment but was relieved to see that the sleeping Ninken didn't hit the ground. Naruto turned around and looked at Hana, who just smiled and waved at him. He smiled back but walked up to the genin girl and took the pup off of his head and held it out to her. "Sorry about letting them fall asleep. Here you go." He handed her the other two once she had put the first one on her head and the other two went on her shoulders, like how they were with Naruto. Girl just shook her head and smiled. No worries. They seem to like you a fair bit. Maybe you can head over to the compound and see them again sometime. She said to Naruto, who jumped in joy and nodded. Hana then looked at the Hokage and bowed slightly, being careful not to make the pups fall. It's getting late and I need to make sure my brother doesn't get into trouble. Goodbye, Hokage-sama. She said just as she left, only barely being able to see the old man wave back to her. Anko smiled at Naruto and ruffled his hair, getting him to place his attention back onto her. A split second later, Naruto was attached to her legs again, constantly thanking her. He had no intentions of stopping soon and Anko just ruffled his hair again before looking at the Hokage. So, can I take him home? He looks all healed up. Anko said, glancing down at Naruto once more. Hiruzen looked at Naruto as well and smiled at the boy before returning his gaze to Anko. Only if you're ready. If not, he can stay at the hospital for a few more days. Anko laughed a little and shook her head. She stayed quiet for a little so that she could hear Naruto slowing down. His grip was getting weaker as well. She could tell that the effects of a day of running around were starting to get to him. I'll be fine, Hokage-sama. I'm just happy I could make him smile like this. The young woman then looked down and smiled at Naruto before removing him from her legs. She could see that he was sad at being removed but looked up at her in childlike curiosity. Alright Gaki, let's go home. 240. Chapter 7. The Friends. Naruto was the happiest person in the ninja world at the moment. He had just gained a new friend and a new mother all in the same day. He now had a friend to play around with and a mother that was all his. He finally had people other than the Hokage and the Ichiraku family that cared for him and he couldn't be happier. Anko was happy as well. Naruto's smile and attitude were infectious and made everyone around him feel better. She was happy because he was happy. His life was finally going to get better. The two walked in relative silence as the boy was too excited to even speak at the moment. All he could do was walk forward and smile like a maniac. He squealed and jumped around but didn't speak. His hand was in hers as they walked side by side, not caring about any of the people glancing at them with hate. Most of the looks were actually out of curiosity, not of anger. They had heard about how Anko killed a guy the other night while protecting Naruto and they were a little more afraid of the two of them now. It was rather quiet between the two of them as they walked through the streets, but that all ended when Anko stopped and looked at Naruto. When was the last time you ate, Gaki? She asked the boy. He was quiet for a moment but spoke back to her after thinking for a few seconds. A few days, I think he said back to her as he tried to remember, getting her to look at him curiously. A few days. But you've only been in the hospital for one. Before the villagers got you, how many days has it been since you last ate? She rephrased her question, hoping to retrieve a better answer from Naruto. So today is Thursday and I was in the hospital Wednesday 3 days. Not with Wednesday. He said happily, knowing that it was the right answer. Anko looked at him with worry. You haven't eaten in 5 days. Gaki, we need to get you something to eat. Now. She ended with confidence, easily picking him up and placing him on her shoulders to get to her favorite dango shop. It was only a matter of seconds before they reached their destination and Anko put Naruto down on the ground. She knew that he could have ran with her to the shop but he hadn't eaten in days and he was probably at least a little tired from running ever since he woke up. Naruto looked at his surroundings and then to Anko, his face asking for answers. Where are we? He asked her. This, my dear Gaki, Anko paused to put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Is the home of the greatest food in existence. Dango. She said happily, getting an odd look from Naruto, who shook his head at her. No, ramen is the best food. He spoke back defiantly. Anko snorted and began to laugh, even tearing up a bit. Ha. Ramen. It's good kid but not as good as dango. Naruto shook his head again and somewhat glared at her. Ramen is the food of the gods. Tsuchiya-san said so. Trust me, Naruto. When you taste dango, you'll agree with me. Anko spoke confidently, fully believing that dango could calm the mightiest of beasts and the largest of hungers. Just try it Gaki. She continued, leading Naruto into the dango shop and over to the counter. It was a little store but the size of the place didn't mean anything. Many people said that they sold the best dango in Konoha and Anko took that fact to heart as the one proving it true or not. The snake mistress ordered a few sticks of dango. Half of it was going to Naruto and the other half was for her. She was sure that he would change his tune about ramen being the best. The two of them sat down at a booth and began to eat. Without fear or worry, Naruto took one of the dango sticks and ate the dumplings. He caught Anko's expectant look and nodded at her. It's good. He said to her, getting her to celebrate due to the fact that she thought that she had gotten him to admit that it was the better of two foods. But not better than ramen. Her celebrating stopped and a look that would make the Kikbi cower in fear appeared on Anko's face. Naruto was frozen in fear and could only listen to what she had to say. I let you have my dango. My dango. And you still say that Raymond is better, she asked furiously. She hardly let anyone have a share of her dango. The least he could do was humor her for a little before saying that Raymond might have been a little better than dango. Well, that's fine, kid. Can't force you onto something, she said with a happy smile, ignoring the fact that she had just scared her new son shitless. She ruffled his hair and smiled a little when he whimpered in fear. Why, you're not going to kick me out or abandon me or anything? He asked with uncertainty. His reaction caused Anko to look at him quizzically. No. Why would I do something like that? I mean, I took it upon myself to look after you, to adopt you as my Musuko, and I plan on doing it, she said with confidence and a warm smile. She was quiet for a moment, hearing that he was still whimpering a little in fear. She sighed lightly, taking in a small breath as she looked at him with sympathy. Listen, Gaki. I didn't mean to scare you. She paused, shrugging her shoulders. Well, maybe a little, but not to this extent. She got up from her side of the booth and sat down next to Naruto, putting a hand on his shoulder as she looked down at him with a smile. You think that Raymond is better, then that's cool. It just means that I have to try harder to get you to admit that dango is better, she said with joy, laughing a little in an attempt to make Naruto feel a bit better. Naruto smiled at his adoptive mother and laughed along with her, taking another stick of dango not long after. The two of them had a good dinner, talking and learning a bit more about the other. With Naruto, it wasn't all that hard to learn just about everything about him. He was a 6-year-old who lived off of Raymond and what the old Hokage gave him. It was saddening and angering at the same time to hear about how the village treated Naruto. Anko knew how bad the village could be, but to hear every story from the boy who had experienced it all set Anko on a whole new level of hate for the village. Naruto learned about Anko and how similar she was to him. The village didn't like her either, but she fought for the respect that she currently had, something that Naruto wanted to do. He wanted to fight and earn the recognition and respect of the village. He wanted to show them that they were wrong in being so mean to him. That he wasn't the fox stored inside. He found out that something bad happened to her because of someone else that made most people in the village hate her, and he really felt like he could connect with his new mother. Currently, the fox and snake duo was on its way to Anko's and now also Naruto's home. He was still excited about living with Anko, but not to the same extent that he was before they had gotten dinner. So, what are we gonna do when we get home? Naruto asked, his face showing that he was trying to keep himself from getting tired. It was a pretty adorable sight, seeing the little boy tiredly looking up at Anko. Anko looked down at Naruto and thought for a moment. Naruto was looking tired and she didn't really have any plans for the moment. She had plans for the following day, but not right now. I don't know, Gaki, she said quietly, continuing to think about how to spend the rest of the day. She took a glance at him and nodded knowingly. Don't know, she repeated, walking forward as they neared their house. Anko had a weird feeling, one that got increasingly more noticeable as she moved closer to her house. She didn't know what it was, but decided to keep quiet about it. She was on edge, though, making sure that she was prepared if it was someone who had plans on hurting her or Naruto. The feeling didn't go away as they got closer, and just before Naruto could touch the door, Anko put her hand out in front of his, keeping him from getting to the door. She looked at the boy, who looked back at her in curiosity. Stay here and keep quiet, she said quietly, slowly moving her hand to grasp the knob and turn it. Naruto nodded at her and watched as she opened the door without making a sound. She whispered something inaudible to his untrained ears, but several snakes slithered out of the sleeve of her trench coat and onto the ground, where they proceeded to slither around the house. Anko moved into the house as well and pulled out a kunai just to be safe. She knew who was there and she wanted to know why. With a smirk, Anko moved to the dining room, where a figure was currently making some tea. Anko concealed the kunai and walked over to the figure. So, you're starting to pick up my habit of walking in uninvited, Anko said to the person, who was pouring the tea into 2 cups. The person nodded, knowing who it was because of the voice. It was dark in the kitchen, but that wasn't a problem for the two of them and their ninja training. It seems so. You do it all the time at my house, so it was bound to happen here at some point. Tea. The person offered, holding one of the hot tea cups out to Anko. Anko took the cup of tea and sipped the drink, sighing in satisfaction. She set the cup down on the table and looked at the figure, keeping her eyes on the unmistakable red ones. It's a little dark, don't you think, Nai-chan? I didn't think you were into the darkness. Kurenai shook her head, smiling a little as she sipped from her own cup. I'm not, but I didn't want to alarm you by leaving all of your lights on. Having just the kitchen light on would have also raised suspicion. Really, anything that I would have chosen to do would have brought up at least some suspicion. Anko flipped on the lights, keeping her eyes on Kurenai as she moved back to her cup of tea. Yeah, but still, she smirked at her friend. Invading a friend's house when they aren't home is my thing. Why are you here? Kurenai was silent for a moment, going over her choice of words before speaking them out loud. Nothing much. You said that you had to do something earlier, but the sun's already set. I wanted to have a chat with you to see what was going on, but you weren't here when I came by initially. So, I came back and made some tea for when you came home. She explained herself to Anko, who was listened quietly. Anko had a spark in her eyes, but it was only for a short moment before it went away, hidden in the confines of her mind. Oh, don't worry about it. She looked behind her in surprise, remembering that a 6-year-old boy was standing outside of her door, waiting for the signal to be let in. Oh. That's right. She turned back to Kurenai with a grin. You have to meet your new godson. Kurenai's eyes widened at this, looking at Anko with the same look of surprise. Before she could say anything, Anko spoke again. Naruto, come in here. False alarm, it's just Night-chan. Naruto heard Anko call him from inside the house and walked through the door and closed it behind him. He walked around the house for a brief moment before finding the kitchen, his tired little mind struggling to stay awake. Kurenai turned to Naruto as he walked into the kitchen, and he couldn't be any cuter at the moment. There were small bags under his ocean blue eyes, and his sun-kissed blonde hair was as spiky as ever. Kurenai didn't even want to start thinking about his whiskers. Everything about him was just so cute. In an instant, Kurenai had the boy in her arms, hugging him as tight as humanly possible. I'm going to be this adorable little boy's godmother, she asked excitedly, squeezing him even more than before. She didn't notice that Naruto was trying to break free from her iron grip. Anko-san, help. Naruto managed to get out, still trying to get away from this strange woman who refused to let him go. Eventually, Kurenai stopped suffocating him in a hug and lifted him up so that she could see his face. She practically squealed at his little whiskers and began to pet and stroke them. She was like a giddy teenager at the moment, which was highly unlike her. Naruto had never had someone touch his whiskers before because if he had, he would have been prepared for the feeling that he got from his godmother touching them. Unconsciously, he began to purr and started to drift into unconsciousness. He was like an actual fox, snuggling into Kurenai as she continued to pet his whiskers, which caused him to keep purring. It made him all the cuter in the Genjutsu mistress's eyes. Neither she nor Anko could believe how cute he was becoming, even as he drifted off to sleep. "The purrs?" Kurenai asked excitedly and semi-rhetorically. With wide eyes and a shrug, Anko responded. I guess. I don't know, it's never happened before. In little time, Naruto fell asleep from the affectionate treatment from Kurenai, who wouldn't let go of him until Anko ordered her to do so. He needed to get some rest, and he would have a better sleep on a bed than in Kurenai's iron grip. Once he was put in Anko's bed, as it was the only bed in the house at the moment, Anko moved back to the kitchen where she continued to talk to Kurenai. So, you're really making me his godmother? Kurenai asked, unsure if her friend was actually being serious about that or not. Much to her enjoyment, Anko nodded. Of course. You're better mother material than I am, and I probably won't be able to raise him right without you. She said confidently, knowing that Kurenai would probably take the role of godmother, even if she didn't have the title. Thank you, Anko. You won't regret it. She said happily, thinking back on the adorable little boy she was going to be raising with her friend. And eventually the day ended, and Kurenai went home after going to Anko's room and holding on to Naruto for a few minutes. Anko had to carefully pry Naruto out of Kurenai's arms so that he could continue sleeping, and a little while later she joined him in the bed. He slept on the far end of one side, and Anko took the other side. She knew that she'd have to get him a bed and a room of his own if they were going to be living together, but she was going to worry about that later. The next morning, a little boy woke up from what he believed to be the best and saddest dream of his life. He had been rescued from the villagers by a woman and her snakes and was taken in by her. In the dream, he had also gained some friends, one of them being a girl a few years older than he is, and the other 3 being her dogs that followed her around. It was such a perfect dream, and it ended with meeting one more person, who was apparently now his godmother. As he woke up, he didn't bother to notice that his bed was much comfier and larger than before, not to mention that his room was entirely different as well. He didn't take notice of the nearly naked woman sleeping next to him, as he was drowned in his own sadness because of what he believed to have been a dream and not reality. He also didn't notice that he wasn't in his tattered clothes anymore and only wore the trunks that he had on previously. As he woke up more, though, he began to take note of all of the differences until it hit him, and a look of excitement was spread across his face. He jumped in excitement as he realized that it wasn't a dream, and he couldn't believe that he thought it was in the first place. He wasn't in his own home because that wasn't his home anymore. He lived here with Anko now, and he couldn't be happier. He walked back to Anko's room, where he found the woman just as naked as he was in the bed. She seemed fairly peaceful, but was stirring just the slightest bit. Her hand covered the left side of the base of her neck and she seemed to have been experiencing something bad in her dream. Naruto wanted to see what she was holding, but he didn't want to disturb her sleep. Before he could do anything else, he heard a knocking at the door. As it was still early out and he wasn't fully awake yet, Naruto decided to get the door to see who was there. The little boy walked over to the door and opened it just before the person on the other side could knock again. The man on the other side of the door was well built and much taller than Naruto was at the time. He had a bear-like physique and wore a black trench coat and a bandana-styled hit. He had 2 large scars going across his face and a slightly surprised expression on his face. He was expecting for Anko to be at the door and not this little kid who lacked clothes. They were both quiet for a moment, taking in each other's appearance. Ibiki noted the seal on the boy's stomach and knew who he was instantly. The village pariah, Naruto Uzumaki. He felt a little bad for the boy, but he still had questions about his presence. I know Anko usually likes them young, but he's a little too young for her tastes. Ibiki whispered under his breath, not worried that Naruto would be able to hear him or understand what he was saying. He then looked straight into the blue eyes of the little blonde boy in front of him. Do you know where Anko is? He asked calmly, trying to keep his interrogational tendencies at hand until he had a better understanding of the situation. Naruto nodded at him. He was a little scared of the giant man before him, but he needed to stay calm. Yep. She was still sleeping when I woke up, so I was careful to not wake her up when I left the bee. He was interrupted by Ibiki, whose face morphed into a slight scowl as he walked into the house, pushing Naruto out of the way in the process. He then turned around and shut the door before grabbing Naruto and practically throwing him on the couch. Naruto was scared now, but was too afraid to make a sound. I'm going to be quiet to keep her from getting up, but I don't need to raise my voice to get what I want out of you. Ibiki said coolly. He had to watch what he said to the boy. He was probably pretty mentally fragile because of the village and he didn't want to add to that torture. What are you doing here? He asked in the same cool voice. Naruto was paralyzed in fear. This man was now truly scaring him and Naruto could barely move or speak. One of his hands gripped his leg and held on so tightly that his nails were digging into his skin, causing some blood to come out of his leg. He was young, but he knew that he could override his fear with pain. That was surprising to Ibiki. He didn't know that Naruto knew of that kind of technique, even though it was fairly common to do things like hurt yourself to override fear in stressful missions or scenarios. What he did next, though, truly surprised Ibiki and even scared him a bit too. The little boy shouted to the heavens as loud as he possibly could. Anko-kasan. He yelled out during his brief moment of pain. His wound was nothing to a ninja and it healed instantly. It closed and repaired itself in a matter of seconds, just enough time for Anko to come flying out of her room and into the living room with a kunai in each hand. She had awoken because of Naruto calling out her name and she reacted in an instant, finding kunai wherever available at the time and not worrying about clothes until after whatever was happening was dealt with. She lunged at Ibiki, who barely had any time to react and was pinned on the ground with a kunai to his neck and another to his wrist. He could easily pick her up and move her aside, but he was still suffering from the shock of being thrown to the floor. Why are you here and what the hell are you doing to my Musuko? Anko asked furiously, not recognizing Ibiki until a few seconds after speaking. She then smiled sheepishly and got off of him, leaving the room with a quick 1 sec. Before vanishing to her room. Because of what events had just happened in the last few seconds, Ibiki learned just what he wanted to know. It seemed within the last few days, 2, maybe 3 at the most, Anko adopted Naruto and took him in as her son. She was too busy with him to go to work for the past 2 days and she was most likely so tired from the recent events that she slept in later but was not sleeping heavily enough to ignore the loud screaming by her son. As she is a ninja and a damn fine one at that, she reacted instantly at being called out during her sleep and attacked the first person in sight through instinct alone. Ibiki stood up and faced Naruto, who was still scared of the man. Ibiki nodded and looked into his eyes. Sorry kid. He said plainly, trying to think of some better words to use. He was good with using words and phrases that tore apart people, not putting them back together. Good thinking with clawing yourself, though. Didn't think you'd know that. He flashed him a small and rare smile, sitting next to the boy. Anko took you in. He said, rather than asked, knowing that it was what was happening. The two of them sat in silence, waiting for Anko to come back. Ibiki had little to say because he felt like there was little so say in the situation. Naruto was just scared shitless. When Anko came back in, Naruto was the first one to speak, getting looks from both Ibiki and Anko. Why are all of your friends so weird? Naruto asked, getting looks from both of the adults in the room. Ibiki seemed unresponsive, but actually would have popped a vein if his emotions were seen on his face. Anko simply smirked at the boy. He'd have to get used to that weirdness, as there were hardly ever ninja who were plain and normal. That was what kept the job interesting. Pay him no mind, Ibiki. He'll learn. Anko said confidently, sure that her son will learn his lesson about calling ninja like Kurenai and Ibiki weird. Anko sat down in between Naruto and Ibiki and relaxed in her seat as she glanced at the both of them. So yeah. I'm sorry for not checking in or anything, but as you can see, my life has taken a bit of a turn. I have to cash in those days off so we can get settled living with each other, as well as get more food and get him some new clothes. That jumpsuit of his looked like a one size fits most, and he can't be wearing something like that out during missions. A little orange, but probably burnt or something to keep from getting too much attention. Ibiki nodded in understanding. He didn't have any kids of his own, but he treated Anko like a daughter, even if she was only a few years younger than he was. And what of high priority events? If you know everything about the boy, like I'm sure you do, then you should know that he's probably going to be invited to several events in the future. He has to look good as well. Make an impression. Yeah. Got it. We'll deal with that more when the Hokage tells the village. He's going to bring it up at a council meeting before telling everyone else. She cut him off. He didn't say anything about it and he understood, but he still wasn't happy about it. Though, I do wonder how you know something like that. Anko said accusingly, wondering how Ibiki would know about Naruto's heritage. Ibiki smiled briefly and looked at the boy. It should be easy to pin down that face and his tendencies. Shikaku should have identified him as soon as he laid eyes on the boy. Anko said accusingly, wondering how Ibiki would know about Naruto's heritage. Ibiki smiled briefly and looked at the boy. It should be easy to pin down that face and his tendencies. Shikaku should have identified him as soon as he laid eyes on the boy. Anko nodded back at the master interrogator and got up from her seat. They couldn't get what they needed while sitting down. Well. She said as she stretched. We should get going. Come on Naruto, we're heading out. She then glanced at Ibiki, who was getting up as well, as she opened up the door. You can join us if you want. You could help bring down the prices if they seem too high. This got Ibiki to smile more and nod, and the three of them left the house. After all, it was always fun to terrify the masses. Walking through the shopping district of Konoha, Ibiki, Anko, and Naruto were all looking at shops to visit. They had gotten the boy some practice weapons, including a sword by the suggestion of the cat mask Anbu who was supposed to just be watching. Not helping Naruto find the perfect blade to train with by going through every available sword and picking out the best one that would suit him for the time being. The three of them had just left one of the top ninja gear and weapons stores with several outfits and weapons in their hands. It was called Higurashi Weapons and was actually one of the few places that day where Ibiki didn't have to haggle with the store owner to lower the prices. He was a weapons expert and knew a decent amount when it came to selling, so he understood Naruto's position and allowed him to come into his store anytime. He seemed like a nice man and even wanted to introduce Naruto to his daughter, who was out at the moment with her mother. Naruto made a note to come back there for weapons and things. Ibiki helped Anko pick out some outfits that were good for both missions and more formal occasions. It wasn't until minutes after leaving the store that they found Kurenai walking through the district as well, seemingly on the lookout for something. Anko was the first to speak to her, getting her attention as the group stood a little distance away. Kurenai? What are you doing here? Anko asked, curious about her friend's presence. Kurenai's head snapped in the direction of Anko and looked at her with slight surprise. She currently had a somewhat large bag with her that seemingly held several clothes that she picked out for herself. Oh, Anko. It's good to see you and Naruto. Hello Ibiki-san. Ibiki nodded at Kurenai in recognition before looking around. Kurenai's attention moved to Naruto, who was still looking at all of the cool ninja gear in the shop through the windows. Naruto-kun. Can you come over here for a second? Naruto's attention was caught by Kurenai as she called him by name and the boy nodded before walking over to his godmother. Kurenai smiled and reached into her bag, digging around for something. I'm out shopping because I wanted to surprise you with a few outfits. Well, they can be used for running around, jumping, and even training, they're more or less durable civilian clothes. A spark came into her eyes and she moved her hand out of the bag and grabbed Naruto's hand. Since you're here, we can try out all of these clothes that I got you. And I have to see the things that Anko and Ibiki-san got you as well. Come on. She said happily as she dragged Naruto, taking him into one of the stores so that they could go to a dressing room and to say the least, Naruto did not have a fun time. After they were done with all of the clothes, Naruto, Anko, Ibiki and Kurenai all walked to the market to get food for Naruto and Anko. Anko had already shopped for food, but she wanted to go back to get some things that Naruto might have wanted that she didn't already have. The four of them all walked into the store and began to walk around. They all followed Naruto, as he seemed to have an idea of what he wanted to get. What he did surprised everyone, but only to a certain extent. They had walked into an aisle, all following Naruto, and just watched with surprise as he filled his entire basket with ramen cups. They waited until he was done before speaking. Oh Raymond. Naruto, you know that you're going to have to eat other things, right? Kurenai asked, who simply got an odd look from the boy that she was talking to. It was like he didn't know that there were other food that existed that were so much better and healthier than ramen. No, I only eat ramen. He said happily, not realizing that all of that ramen was horribly unhealthy. Anko shook her head at her son. No Naruto. Ramen's good and all, but you can't be a good ninja on just that. Her words seemed to have hurt Naruto. Are you saying that you don't eat dango all the time, Ka-san? He asked her harshly, uncharacteristically for a child of his age. Yes, Gaki. That's exactly what I'm saying. Dango is delicious, dango is the best, but it isn't everything. If you had ramen every day, then you'd turn out short, malnourished, and incapable in a battle. It's good every once in a while, like dango but it's not an everyday thing. Naruto pouted. He wanted to argue, he really did, but the large man with the scars and the crazy woman with the clothing were scaring him. He hadn't gotten to meet the scary side of Anko, so he wasn't afraid of her, at least not yet. He simply nodded and put more than half of the ramen back on the shelf before returning to Anko and the rest of the group. She smiled at him, patted his head, and brushed her hand across his whiskers, which caused him to make a small sound that he wasn't prepared to make. He looked at Anko with a light scowl and went to check out the few cups of ramen he had with him. He was going to cherish those, as he was sure that he wouldn't be having much. And he was right. The following day, the village stirring quite loudly because of a certain snake mistress and a certain blonde running all throughout the streets of Konohagakure. The boy in question was currently running for his life out of fear because his adoptive mother was chazzing him with a grin that only a madwoman would wear. She had a kunai in each hand and a spark in her eyes that made Naruto cower in fear. When Naruto was running from the Anbu the other day, he wasn't going his fastest because he knew it was just a game, but he was still trying so he could get out of the hospital. This was an entirely different scenario. Naruto woke up this morning by being scared by Anko and then was fed a healthy and rather plentiful breakfast before getting down to grueling training. She wasn't going to put him in the forest of death, not yet. While Anko had said that he'd only be doing light training because of his age and experience, it was the worst thing that he had ever done. Anko promised Naruto that if he could outrun and outmaneuver her for most of the day, then she'd teach him something cool. Naruto weaved through the streets, being followed by a madwoman who seemed to have had the intent to kill him. The little blonde boy weaved through the streets, running into the onsen without hesitation. He went through a flash of hand signs and transformed into a much taller being. It was a female version of himself, and a quite beautiful one at that. The disguised boy stayed at the onsen for a few minutes before walking out and reverted back to his normal appearance. Only seconds later was there a figure behind him who was smiling at him with that odd and disturbing smile of his. Anko was impressed that he could do the henge, especially at his young age. She wondered how she could do it, but would ask him after she captured him and put him in one of the interrogation chairs at T&I. This exercise was to simulate being chazzed as an actual ninja, and since he was just about to be captured, he would be interrogated. He'd have to hold up against her tactics that she reserved especially for him. She tapped the boy on the shoulder and bent down, so her face was right next to his. She whispered into his ear in such a way that scared him. Gotcha. Ah crap. Sexy jutsu time. How Naruto came to be. Naruto woke up with a rather quick start. He wanted to relish in the feeling of being half asleep, but the bright lights in his face kept him from dozing off. He had even tried to shut his eyes as tight as possible, but it was of no use. Naruto attempted to move his hands in front of his face, but he couldn't do so because his arms were strapped into a chair, along with his legs. He struggled to get free, but nothing he could do would help in the situation. So, you're awake, Gaki? A familiar voice asked him. He couldn't see where it was coming from, but he was sure that she was behind the bright light in his face. Naruto groaned and looked down, trying to shield his eyes from the bright light. Anko laughed, turning down the intensity of the lights. Alright Naruto. I won our little game of chase, and now you're going to be interrogated by me and Kurenai. Got it? She asked seriously. While she was going to interrogate him like she would with a missing ninja criminal, she could only do so much because he was a 6-year-old boy. Naruto nodded and looked at Anko, who was now visible because of the dimmer light. Anko smiled. Good. She said as she walked in front of the light, placing a dull kunai at his neck. Now where did you learn that jutsu? She demanded an answer from him, but was still going soft on the boy. Earlier that day, she had told him that when she captured him, he would be interrogated and he would have to do everything that he could to keep himself from giving information to her. So of course, he was going to put up as much of a struggle as a stubborn boy could at his age. Naruto shook his head and looked away from Anko. Of course he was scared because she had a kunai to his neck, but he was told to be strong and stubborn. Nope. He replied back, getting Anko to realistically feign anger. Anko pushed the dull kunai further against Naruto's neck, and at this point he knew that it was too dull to cut someone using the amount of force she was currently using. It'd have to be sharper if she wanted answers from him. Anko looked behind her. "Kurenai," she called out, getting the red-eyed woman to step forward. "Put him under a genjutsu. Give him your worst." Naruto was a little more scared now. Kurenai seemed crazy to him because she had almost strangled him when they first met and assaulted him with clothes the day before. He could only wonder what her worst was and took a small gulp in fear. Kurenai nodded at Anko and did several hand signs, grinning when she saw her godson gulp in fear of her. She wouldn't use anything too scarring on him, something that would have affected him and him alone. She had been told by Anko to go a little hard on him, but only so much. He was just starting out and they couldn't use everything they had against him. She had been told that he could use the hinge, but Kurenai hadn't seen it for herself. She wanted to, but only after this was done. She didn't say anything aloud, but the chakra that she flared signified that the genjutsu was now active. Naruto's eyes went wide and his body was still as he experienced the genjutsu. It was of Anko, Kurenai, Ibiki, Yugao and Kakashi all sitting at Ichiraku ramen and denying the boy food. To any normal person, this would hardly be anything, but these were people that Naruto knew and liked as friends, and they were denying him the ultimate food in existence. Moments later, Kurenai released the genjutsu and Naruto looked at his mother pleadingly. "I'll tell you anything but don't say that I can't have ramen ever again please." He rushed out as he looked at Anko with obvious fear and panic in his eyes and voice. Anko sighed. Kurenai was good by hitting Naruto in a place where it hurt, his stomach, and it was going to prepare him by getting him to know that enemy shinobi would use any and all weaknesses against their opponents, but not ever letting Naruto ever have ramen again was a little much. The snake mistress then nodded, glancing at Kurenai and silently telling her to undo the straps on his hands and legs. Kurenai nodded back and did as she was silently told, stepping back a moment after doing so. She watched as Naruto got up and attempted to block the boy from moving past her. Naruto tried to make a run for it and got past both Anko and Kurenai, but he was stopped at the door where Ibiki stood. The bear-like man simply looked down at Naruto and cast a cold glare at the boy, getting him to back up in fear before putting his hands together to make seals. He transformed into his female counterpart for Ibiki and Kurenai to see and transformed back a moment later. Both Kurenai and Ibiki were shocked to see such a beautiful woman take the place of Naruto and assumed that there must have been more to the story than just that. Anko looked at the boy curiously and put a hand on his shoulder. "How'd you learn that?" she asked him. "I was sneaking around a while ago and I saw a guy make those with his hands. I did it and I had an idea to use it to be someone else so I could buy things. The people like the pretty girls the best, so that's what I transformed into." He explained to Anko, Ibiki and Kurenai. They were all both proud and saddened by the fact that he had learned this jutsu just because he couldn't walk into stores looking like himself. Anko gave him a sad smile and patted his shoulder. "You did good running and you fared okay with the physical torture, but mental torture is what we have to work on. Ibiki and Kurenai can help you with that later. I say we get Raymond to celebrate your first day of training and after that I'll teach you something cool." The two of them walked out of the interrogation room with smiles on their faces. What if Sharingan Naruto has arranged marriage with Hana? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.